I'll share with you my flowers from the garden. So looking at something
Oh, that's beautiful.
nice and fresh.
Yeah.
I think probably the last roses.
And you're holding it right under your painting with red flowers in it.
Oh, yeah,
So,
like that.
yeah, so it definitely works. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Turn this off. Okay.
Lori, you've earned yourself a long weekend. Lori's she's had 2 international conferences in the last 2 weeks,
Oh my gosh.
infinite other numbers of hour-long sessions and programs and all of this kind of thing. It's an amazing streak you've been on. But thank you. This has been fantastic, having so many people from around all places. This is great.
I'm gonna be a Zoom zombie for Halloween.
Zoom zombie is a good term.
Or a Zombie.
A
Zombie.
A Zombie.
Zombie, yes.
Just in time for Halloween.
Yes,
Exactly.
exactly.
You don't need a costume. You could just come as you are.
I think I'm gonna just do that. I'm gonna write that on a T-shirt and just put that on.
Any other questions or comments?
I'm a zombie.
So maybe I can begin because it is, well, should we give maybe one more minute? 11:02, maybe 11:03, we begin. I was speaking with Venerable Prayadarshi before the meeting, and we were talking about the panel on the first day, and I was getting anxious. How should I direct the questions? One question for everyone or individual. He said, Elif, leave some room for spontaneity. And I said, well, yes, between 12:57 and 1:03, I'll do that. We have like 2 minutes to be maybe spontaneous, and then we have to move on.
But you know what? And before we go official, I think that's a good observation as we consider for next time. Can
Yes.
we build in more of those moments? Perhaps a couple of chunks of time.
Definitely.
But I think like your lunchtime conversation yesterday, I thought was really simple and perfect.
I really enjoyed it too. So with that, maybe what time is it? Okay, let's begin. So I'll make my first announcement. Well, welcome to day 3 of the Designing for Empathy Summit. Thank you very much for being here. So I have a few announcements, housekeeping related. The first one for presenters, especially Laurel Abbott from Woodland Park Zoo will be our timer for the presenters. So you can pin her visual so she can prompt you regarding your timing. That would be helpful. And Lori Karshner kindly uploaded the videos from yesterday, videos and the chats from day 2. So they should be available for you to review. Regarding the cafe gathering that we did yesterday for half an hour, I would like to propose to extend it for 15 more minutes. So I will be available at 12:45. So basically, I'll just take a 15 minutes break and then come back and be here. I would love to hear from as many of you as possible, especially our friends, joining us from overseas. I know that we have people from Russia, South Africa, India, Greece, Cyprus, Turkey, and I'm sounding like Eurovision contest here a little bit, but I would love to hear from you, and please, drop in to share with us a few words about your work. And with that, I think I've covered everything. I also wanted to share with you two quotes that just came to me overnight as I was thinking about our discussions. And I don't know if they are uploaded right now, but I cannot see it, but they should be there in the chat shortly, if not yet. I thought these could be good sort of think pieces for us to contemplate as we gear up our last day. So with that, I would like to welcome our first presenter, Zorana Ivsevic from Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, Director of the Creativity and Emotions Lab, and she will talk to us, and the secretary of this new organization, One, Organization of Networks for Empathy. With that, I would like to welcome her. She will share with us her presentation titled Representing and Using Emotional Experience in Art. Zorana, please take the floor.
I'm muting myself and I'm about to share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
Thank you, Elif. Thank you for the invitation and thank you for the honor for getting this final day of the summit kickstarted. I actually changed my title since we last spoke because things evolve all the time. I would like to talk to you about emotions and empathy in the artistic process, and in particular, how artists create those experiences we can feel into. We have seen in the very first day of the summit from a wonderful presentation by Susan Lanzoni that told us a history of the term empathy. And it's a pretty new term in the English language, just some 100 years old. And it comes from German in describing feeling into. It was originally used to describe aesthetic encounters, encounters with art. And those cognitive efforts and affective experiences in aesthetic encounters. So my question is, how does that happen? And I am a research psychologist, and of course we start our work in a particular way by looking what other scientists have done before. So I was looking at what kinds of questions people have asked before that are related to this idea. And what I have found is something that was not quite satisfactory to me. People have asked the question of what are the emotions that help creative thinking and what are the emotions that hinder creative thinking. And they have done this in a particular way. So people would be brought into the lab and then given a task that looks about this. So a set of circles or dots, and they would be told that these are unfinished drawings. And now your task is to finish these drawings. And people can really get imaginative about this and do something like this. And it's fun. Reliably, we get the finding that people who are in more happy moods do more imaginative and original, come up with more imaginative, original ideas to these kinds of tasks. But that was not really answering my question. This is not sufficient to answer that curiosity of what happens, how do artists create those experiences we can feel into. This is my favorite piece of art in all of art history. How is the emotion created here? What is it that artists do in this piece or in those pieces that we all can relate to, and those pieces that create different perspectives in us and create questions and make us want to learn more and relate to the world in new ways. So being a scientist, I said, well, if the answer is not out there, I want to try to answer it and address it. So what we did in my lab is do a research study of close to 100 artists that were from different areas of artistic work. So they were painters, they were sculptors, photographers, composers, choreographers, writers. You get the picture, a broad group of people in different artistic areas. And we asked them to think and reference a specific work that they have either recently completed or is especially meaningful to them in some ways. And then we asked them questions about emotions in the different stages of their creative process. We wanted to see how they create those experiences we as audiences can then feel into. So we wanted to open that creative process. And first thing that we asked about was inspiration. Okay, what emotions come into play in the process of inspiration? And this is what we found, a great variety. So it's not just that happiness that laboratory studies are telling us. In the real world, there's great variety, from happiness and joy to love and hope, to very complex emotions like nostalgia that is really has elements of melancholy for the past, but also fondness of what was meaningful and important to us. And we wanted to get a sense, that vivid sense of the lived experience. And this is what artists have told us as an example of their inspiration. Remembering melancholy, a delightful visit to Booth Bay Harbor, and the standout beauty of the daisies in multiple window boxes inspired this work at the time of my husband's serious illness. In my work, I wondered how the use of multimedia supplies would create a pleasing whole. Detail work, confidence, and managing complexity, these are all words by the artist, was meticulously portrayed using colored pencils. The completed work, satisfaction, represented utilization of options to create the desired result, paralleling my life at the time. I focused on a single bloom as I was focused on my husband's well-being. Or another example, recalling a specific situation. Sitting in a public place like an airport or a station, I just got really excited about all the people around me, and I felt a lot of empathy for them because I was the one of them, and I knew there was probably someone watching me as well. So it made me want to recreate those feelings in gallery setting, and it influenced a lot of my decisions in making the work, such as helping me to keep a neutral voice in the work, to leave an open space for the viewer, and keeping the drawing simple and minimal to allow them to focus on the gestures of the people. And in the daily work, once you have an inspiration, that inspiration has to get actualized. We see a lot of different emotions there too. There's happiness and joy and the excitement, but also a lot of frustration. We all here are creating in different ways, and we know that it's a difficult process with lots of ups and downs. So what happens in that process? Again, in artist's own words, I intended the painting to be for my mother, as she loved the color yellow. As the painting evolved, I realized the tulips couldn't be yellow. It simply didn't work with the painting. Eventually, they became blue tulips. There were 5 of them in the vase. I realized that each flower had become a metaphor for the 5 of us in our little family: mother, father, sister, brother, me. I titled the painting after a quote I had recently seen and written down: "You will always exist in the universe in some form." I finished the painting late in the day. The act of painting, it had been a soul as much as it was an act of love. My mother died a few days later. The painting is loaded with meaning, and I could never part with it. Or another artist describing a situation with the idea for the piece was centered on mortality. To personalize it, I used things associated with the larger idea that were specific to me, to embrace the fear, but also to record the things I felt connected to that I might be afraid of losing. The process can shift from concept to insight, to intellectual problem solving, to assessment, to maker, to viewer, to believer, to skeptic. If art is to be more than entertainment, something needs to be at stake. Personalize it, making it more dangerous, but more valuable if some understanding is to be had. So what we see here is not that there is one kind of emotion that is particularly facilitated in art or that is making art meaningful. We see a variety of emotions. It is not what we experience, but what we do with our experience. And those are the processes of emotional intelligence. What we do with those emotions and how we transform them in the process of creating something. And this using emotions is giving us glimpses to how the experience is created that then we as audience can feel into. In particular, there's this drawing and personalizing and relating it to the self. So emotions are used by recalling emotional memories. And the artist has described my emotional memories helped create the vision of the piece and the arc which it would take. And I continue to tap into those emotions when I needed help reevaluating what I was creating. Or in another instance, with more detail, we see the story was influenced by losses I had experienced in my own life. So this is a writer describing, I projected those feelings onto the two characters in my story. One of the characters was based on this woman I frequently drove by on the street. She always walked with her head bowed down and looked incredibly sad. I became so curious as to what made this woman look so sad. So I invented a story about her and connected my own experiences of loss to her imagined loss. I used my feelings as a starting off point to inform the women's backstories and their actions. So we see this process of creation and thinking of what the audience is going to feel into. So artists are creating very rich experiences, drawing and personalizing, going from their own imagining onto others and into their observations. We can engage as an audience in this process, but that is an act of active engagement. And research on audience engagement in art museums is showing that on average, people spend just under 30 seconds in front of a piece of art. And that is on average, which means that really there are some people who are spending a lot of time, but when we dug into how much time most people are spending, it turns out it's only 10 seconds. This is my son, who really enjoys art and really tries to experience it as a full body experience of listening to a piece, of seeing it from different angles and different perspectives. If we do that, just as artists personalize in the process of creation, we can use similar processes as feeling into the art. And I am very excited that right after my presentation, the next presenter is going to be Pablo Tinio, who will essentially continue where I left off and tell us about how the audience engages and creates that emotional experience with the art. And there I would like to say thank you again for the invitation and the chance of being here. And I am very much looking forward to any questions that you have.
Thank you so much, Lorana, for starting our day off with such a thoughtful and an emotion-filled presentation. Here's a very quick question from Nancy. How can you base art on another's experience, or can you?
You can be inspired by it. It is not going to reflect directly and literally somebody's experience. We can make inferences about somebody's experience. We can make educated guesses, but they are approximations. They are never going to be their experience itself. So that act of personalization and using it as inspiration is a key here.
Thank you. And Seth asks, is the act of empathetic processing cognition a creative process like that of art? How might the understanding of creative process inform human belief, communication, and action?
That's a great question. And I was really interested in that as in this process of understanding what artists are doing. And that's why we started this, this research with really listening in an open-ended way to what artists are doing and not imposing our hypotheses or not imposing our pre-existing interpretations, which as social scientists oftentimes happens. People are coming in with theoretical notions. So we wanted to really listen and be open to what people are doing. And the things that were particularly standing out to me is the diversity of experiences and that personalization and going the step further in thinking of how to communicate it and how the audience is going to experience it. So it is going from past into transformation and into anticipating new set of transformations as the target is taking it as in transforming it again in their own experience.
Thank you so much. And Heather asks regarding the amount of time people spend viewing art. Does that amount of time viewing art vary depending on the context in which it is viewed? Meaning, for example, in a museum gallery setting or online?
You know, I honestly don't know of studies that have looked at the online experience. It is a relatively new thing, and I don't know of it. So I don't know how to address that part. In the museum and gallery setting, people have looked at different art pieces, and it seems to be relatively stable. People have looked at it across different kind of art. The take-home message is that people left to their own devices are going to engage for very short periods of time. And that was interesting to me as we were listening yesterday to the presentation from the Exploratorium, where experiences are facilitated. And as they are facilitated, something happens in that facilitation that enhances the experience. And I think that has significant implications for how we create engagement with the audiences in museums, especially in the context of education. We have worked in my own lab, we have worked with an art center in Spain, the Botín Center, and created educational experiences for them, including some that are in galleries themselves, that are taking what is there already and asking people to pause and creating little experiences that are going to make people stand by and consider art, especially the emotional components of art, for a deliberate longer moment.
Well, and of course, it depends on the motivation of the visitor, whether they're coming to see the art for research or a cognitive experience, or in a social cultural context, or certainly for an affective motivational reason. Rebecca asks or comments, you mentioned the diversity of experiences. Do you mean diversity of experiences within one artist's creative process, or diversity of experiences between different artists?
Both. So that is a great question. And what we found is that within an artist, they oftentimes are mentioning a great variety of experiences. Even just in those examples I had shared, people are mentioning different aspects, from loss to hope to grief to melancholy, all as a part of a single experience. But then there's a component that goes across different artists, where different experiences might be resonating with them.
Thank you. And Elif, I think you had a question about viewing nature.
Yes, I was wondering, how does this knowledge translates into our viewing or our engagement with nature?
I think that's a very interesting question. This idea of feeling into, I really like this translation and way of thinking about empathy. You can feel into a piece of art as a man-made, person-made entity, object, but you can also feel into the environment and engaging with the environment. I have personally not studied it, but I know that that is a powerful source of potent experiences of awe and wonder and transformation, human transformation.
Thank you. And one last question before we move on. Do you think mobile phones could be a vehicle for engaging empathetically with art in some way? The comment comes in the context of being in gallery settings where there's a sea of mobile phones taking pictures of the experience instead of folks just experiencing the experience.
Yeah, that is a question that can have multiple answers on multiple levels, and I very much appreciate it. I actually had a personal experience at a gallery at the Boston's Museum of Fine Arts, and there was a person who was, I kid you not, literally running from one piece to another. She wasn't even pausing and just snapping pictures. You don't really have an experience in that sense. It is possible to engage with a prolonged experience with a piece of art where a picture is taken for further viewing at a later time. And I think it can be valuable that way. There is one research study that I found very interesting, and it shouldn't be the end of it, but they have looked at how much people remember art after taking pictures of it versus not having access to a picture taking device. And they have found that people remember it better and experience it more deeply if they don't take pictures. Now, I think there could be some circumstances where that is not the case, but this was in a natural setting when people take pictures on their own, how they would do it naturally. So I think if the experience of picture taking is more facilitated, it could potentially deepen the experience. But another way how cell phones could come into play in engagement with art is through curated experiences that create connections and different perspectives through an art app, for instance, an art app that is going to create those different ways of seeing pieces of art, or creating connections of art from different times or periods or artists who we did not connect in our minds before. So I see that as a potential.
Thank you very much, Zorana. A fascinating conversation. Elif, I'll turn it to you now.
Thank you, Zorana, for an amazing talk as usual. Thank you for being here. With that, as you mentioned, that I think that the two presentations this morning are complementing each other. I would like to welcome Dr. Pablo Tinio. He is the department chair and head of the Creativity and Aesthetics Lab and Educational Foundations at Montclair State University. And his presentation is titled Emotions, Connections, and the Aesthetic Experience in Museums. Welcome, Pablo.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I hope you can see my slides fine. I just wanted to thank Elif for this invitation, along with the other organizers, to just have this opportunity to talk with you about some of the research that I'm doing. Most of the research I do are with schools and museums. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the sort of the range. First of all, the range of studies that we do goes from the lab to the museum, right? We look at. I'm a psychologist of art. Beginning of my training as a psychologist, it was really focused on looking at things like how visual features like composition and symmetry and complexity influence aesthetic experiences of people looking at artworks and other objects. Over the last 10 years, though, I've moved the lab into the museum. And so, using the range of methods to really get to that experience of art, right? Experience of objects, and trying to figure out what makes that experience when we go into the museum, when we look at a painting and we're standing in front of that painting, what makes that special, right? Not necessarily trying to answer what makes artworks, but what makes that our experiences of artwork special. And today I'm going to talk a lot about emotions, right? And which is and much related to empathy, as Zorana was just talking about. And I'll begin by asking a question. What makes the art encounter psychologically unique, right? One, and I'm going to talk about from a museum sort of context, it's mostly linear. In fact, when visitors go through the museum, if we watch them, and I've done a lot of watching of visitors walking through museums and galleries, they go from one work to the other, and typically the way that exhibitions are curated, it promotes that linear experience. You go, a lot of galleries, you go in one end and then you come out the other end. There's potential for rare and powerful outcomes, and things like awe, right? If you speak with visitors, like what do you take away from let's say an experience of an exhibit, a show, an exhibit? They might say something like, "Wow, that was like I had an awe-inspiring experience. I got chills, right? It made me cry." Okay. For some people, works can be in exhibitions and even specific, like our individual pieces of artworks, could actually be personally transformative for them, right? It touches on a full range of emotions, and it's brief, yet cumulative. Zorana is great that I'm actually following her, and I'm going to steal some of her data. I was writing them down. It's brief because so I've done studies on this where we observe visitors looking at sculptures and paintings by what we call masters, who we call masters, like Rembrandt and Picasso. And the time that people spend looking at these masterpieces, it's about 30 seconds, as Zorana mentioned. It's actually 27.2. And we've done this at the Metropolitan Museum. We did one in 2017 at the Art Institute of Chicago. Colleagues of mine did a bunch in museums in Europe, and they come close to that. It's no longer than 30 seconds, let's put it that way. But it's 10 to roughly 20 seconds if you take out some of the outliers, people, let's say, sitting in front of an artwork because there's a bench there, right? That kind of sways the average, the mean. So that experience is psychologically unique. It is special, but aesthetic experiences, if we look at it, and there's so many things, so many kind of deep responses that it produces. Shared meaning, for example, perspective taking, and now I'm hinting towards empathy, right? These are constructs that are very much related to empathy. Intentionality, metacognition. I should put here a theory of mind, right? Basically how we attribute our emotions and others' emotions. Metacognition, imagination, self-awareness, and self-reflection. So these are all related to empathy. And traditionally within the field of psychology of aesthetics and art and creativity, there's been a divide, right? And Zorana's work is wonderful because she bridges the gap between creativity and aesthetics. But traditionally, creativity researchers do their creativity research. Aesthetics researchers do their aesthetics research. So just one end of that connected spectrum, really. But in practice, that's not the case. So we know, for example, composers and musicians, they do think about their listeners and their audience when they are creating music. We know that writers, novelists think about their readers. I mean, that's during the editing process, for example, you always have the reader in mind. Who is my audience? Who is reading this? And what sorts of things do I want them to feel and think about? Chefs, the culinary arts, think about the patrons of the restaurants and such. On the upper left here, this is what it used to be before COVID, and now the lower right, this is what we're dealing with at the moment. Creative takeout presentations, and then architects have to think about now it's a six foot rule, right, with social distancing. So they think about the people who are going to inhabit and use their spaces. And of course, visual artists. I'm going to focus on visual arts for the remaining of my presentation. They do think about their audience and the viewers and the museum visitors. I'm just gonna, I lifted a few quotes from Zorana's presentation and her interviews with artists. So here's one. The artist said, "I wondered how the use of multimedia supplies could create a pleasant whole." And I think, and another one said, or maybe the same artist, helping me to keep a neutral voice and an open space for the viewer. So they do think about it. And there are some scientists and even art historians who, some of my friends believe that, that the artist in creating an artwork does not think about the viewer or the museum visitor or whoever the consumer is at the end. They only focus on the idea and how they want to express the idea. And that's not, it seems unnatural to me. And the research that I've done, over a decade with artworks, real artworks and reproductions, that's not the case. And also speaking with artists, I know that that's not the case. The aesthetic experience is a conversation. And that's the one thing that that's kind of like the main takeaway point that puts everything together, all the things that I'm going to show you now. So artists think about their audience, they're scientists. For example, Escher, some of these works by Escher with the manipulation of figure ground, right? You need to be able to know how the visual system functions and how we process visual images in order to create a piece like this, where the viewer is confused in a way, right? And it takes a while to figure out what is being depicted in this image. We know caricatures, all right, caricature artists, they know how the visual system works. They exaggerate the features that are inherent in whatever person or inherent in their subjects. Even these images of the elephants, the baby elephant, it exaggerates this idea of babiness, right? Round features, big bright eyes that smile and so forth. So they take advantage of the way we respond to these kinds of images. Photographers do this. So for example, this picture, there's a massive contrast between the darknesses and the lightnesses, like those areas in the image. But technically, visually, physiologically, biologically, our visual system cannot handle such range of contrast from light to dark, right? Ansel Adams was really the one that formalized this, trying to pull apart the darks and the lights in a single image to basically promote a certain response, visual response from the viewer of those pictures. Chuck Close used scale and to sort of manipulate people's responses and physical kind of experiences with of the artwork. So I like to think that where the creative process ends, the aesthetic experience begins. And this is a way of trying to bridge that gap between the creator and the aesthetic viewer, the perceiver. And the last years, I've been working, my colleagues and I, with a model that I proposed. It seems so recently, but it's actually quite many years ago, what I call the mirror model of art. So most of our research is kind of feeding off of this model, this theory. And it begins by like looking at how the art making process actually happens. And I'm going to use the visual arts here as a painting. So most artists, a lot of artists, I should say, but I guess I can say most, in starting a painting, they create a sketch of it, right? It could be on the canvas itself, but oftentimes it's on other sheets of paper. Architects do the same thing. Designers do the same thing. So they kind of translate their initial idea into something like that, and then they develop on this and expand on this. And in the end, they add, they continue to add layers, essentially layers, until you get to the point where you add color and the sort of finishing touches. What we know from the aesthetic experience, from really hard experimental research in the laboratory, is that people begin by processing the surface features of the artworks. And then after that, then we identify what's being depicted. So this is when memory kicks in. Then after that, we start asking questions like, what did the artist intend to do, right? How do I feel about this artwork? What emotions am I feeling? What am I thinking as a result of looking at this artwork? So there's these correspondences between the art making as well as the art viewing, right? So there's something I call the curatorial paradox, and over the years, speaking with curators and museum educators, there's this idea that people have very individualized responses to art, and I find that curious because what we know is that people process things, objects, visual stimuli the same way, similarly, I should say. So essentially, I find it difficult to say that everybody experiences things differently when we actually have a lot in common as far as like our biology, visually, our brains, the way it's the architecture of it. So we have more commonalities, I think, than we have differences. So this is the case with emotions as well. It's one of the most talked about with regards to art, I think. But it's the least understood as far as how people actually process emotions during aesthetic situations. So what I wanted to do initially is to try to see whether there's a correspondence between emotions in artworks and how people actually emotionally respond to those artworks. And I asked 3 questions. 1, what emotions do people report experiencing after encounters with art, and how intense are these emotions? Also, are there correspondences between these emotions and the emotional affordance of an exhibition or artwork? Is there some sort of transfer of emotions from the artwork or exhibition to people's experiences, emotional experiences of that artwork or that exhibition? And importantly, and this is like a key thing, right? This idea that we're so different, that we experience artwork so in various ways, right? To what extent are these emotions shared by visitors? So we did a study at the Whitney Museum of Art. We did other studies in other museums, but this is one of the more comprehensive ones. And I'm presenting data from the Whitney because it's like, I just feel so strongly about it. We looked at 2 exhibitions. One is, it basically had like 20 individual artworks presented. Each one presented its own gallery. And things like Eva Hesse's, this sculpture of like rope, A. Bronson's painting of his partner in his deathbed, dying of AIDS. And then so that's the first exhibition, kind of somber, kind of things from the permanent collection, works from the permanent collection. And the second is this playful, dynamic exhibition by Corey Archangel, where it's like video games and moving things and very interactive, right? And we used this measure. So after people exited the exhibition, we wanted to figure out what emotions they felt. What are the dominant emotions and how strong are these emotions? So we gave them this instrument by Scherer called the emotion wheel. And here you can basically pick one dominant or two dominant emotions and then shade in the circle associated with that emotion type. And the farther they go out, the farther they shade out, the bigger the circle, the more intense the emotion. So we came up with a lot of numbers. So we could have presented these data and just basically figured out like which emotion type was most selected, right? And also which one was the most kind of intense. But we couldn't, it wasn't very easy to see. It's not a good way to analyze that type of data. So what we did was I was doing eye tracking research at that point, and I was inspired, thank you, Laurel. I was inspired by the heat maps that we were using to present eye tracking data. So I worked with Andreas Gardis from the University of Vienna, my alma mater actually. And we tried to present the data this way, all right, called emotion heat maps. So for example, for the Singular Visions exhibit, the one that was like big works from the permanent collection, we looked at the hotter the blobs, right? So here you look at involvement and interest, enjoyment, pleasure. The hotter and the bigger the blobs are, the more people selected these emotions, and also the more intense they reported those as far as like how they felt about that emotion. We had half the visitors go do the instrument this way and half the other way, so there's no right to left bias. And this is from the permanent collection exhibit, and this is from the more playful Corey Archangel, more dynamic, right, more physical exhibit. So if we compare the two, we can, involvement interests were very dominant. But if you look at amusement and laughter, right, on the right side with Corey Archangel, that really represents the exhibition and the artworks within that exhibition. On the left with the Singular Visions exhibit, enjoyment, pleasure. And we also looked at how much time they spent in the exhibition. And then the exploratorium folks yesterday, as Rana mentioned, that time engagement is important. So the more time they spent, the more intense the involvement and interest, and the more intense the enjoyment and pleasure for this exhibit. For Corey Archangel, the same thing. Time intensifies that experience. We also asked them to what extent they reflected on themselves and how they related to the artwork. High reflection was associated with more involvement and interest and enjoyment and pleasure, and really kind of more intense emotional reactions to the artworks. So we also looked at individual artworks. So here are three on the left: O'Keeffe, small painting like this. And her works, actually, O'Keeffe, in this particular work, O'Keeffe talked about nostalgia. Grosvenor in the middle, it's this sculpture hanging from the ceiling, massive thing. It looks like it's about to fall, right? But it is actually pretty stable. And then, of course, A. Bronson's painting. So if we look at O'Keeffe and go from we begin with that, it's like visitors felt nostalgia, wonderment, and feeling awe, right? With the Grosvenor, wonderment, feeling awe, involvement, interest, and then A. Bronson, pity, compassion, sadness, and despair. So there is a transfer of emotions from the artworks to the actual viewers and how they kind of, how they felt after looking at these artworks. And they agreed to it, because if they didn't agree, basically the blogs will be all over the place, essentially. But they kind of, go towards a few of them, a few of the emotion types. So these correspondence, I consider them conversations, and empathy works, it's like an empathic process that works both ways, from the artist to the potential viewer, and then of course the viewer thinking about the artist. If we look at the aesthetic experience, it really is all of these things, and it's reflection, shared meaning, perspective taking, and it the aesthetic experience touches it really promotes this connectedness with art, with ourselves, that idea of self-reflection, and with others, including the artists. And aesthetic encounters flex us cognitively, as far as like learning new things, emotionally, as I just talked about, and physiologically as well. So we've done studies, and then we're currently doing studies now using physiological measures, eye tracking, right, EMG, looking at facial responses and how people respond in those ways to looking at various artworks. And where this is going, of course, continuing this lab to museum push, and I've been really happy and lucky to have been able to collaborate with these museums. And of course, if you're ever interested in collaborating, we're always open to ideas. As trying to mix your museum's goals with our goals, and from a psychological, scientific perspective. And that's all I have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tinio. We have a few questions that are coming in. The first one is from your research. Does language and experience affect the aesthetic experience, or language and background?
Language and background affect this. Yes, it absolutely does. And one of the things that I showed the mirror model. We're very similar in the way we respond to, like, for example, the initial interaction with an artwork, to when we figure out what's being depicted and so forth. That happens within seconds, actually. The processing, let's say, of contrast, of symmetry, and complexity, that happens in milliseconds. Later on in that process, that's when our backgrounds and experiences and knowledge kick in. One thing I didn't present is knowledge about art actually intensifies those emotional sort of reactions, right? And those blobs get hotter the more experience you have and the more knowledge you have about art in general. And definitely, as far as language, I'm not really sure. There's not a lot of studies that have looked at whether it's like, I don't know how you would, there's, I guess, several ways that you could study that, like varying the language, whether it's like information presented with artworks, whether it's presented in your own language or second or third language. Great question, though.
And to your point about knowledge, and I believe you talked about the curatorial paradox briefly, in what ways does interpretation of a particular piece of art in a gallery setting influence an aesthetic response? So, for example, the wall text or an exhibition label of some sort.
Another piece of data that I didn't present. When you read the text, and it's the same study and similar studies where we use this method, when you read the text, whether it's the wall text or the wall text when you come into the gallery explaining like the entire exhibition, or individual labels right next to the works themselves, that also intensifies your reactions. It does two things actually. One, it slows you down to an extent, because actually it not much, but it does slow you down to an extent. It adds a few seconds to that experience. The longer you stay, the more intense your reactions are, emotional reactions. And second, although even if you come into the gallery without the knowledge that might help you to make sense, to help you with that meaning-making process, just having those wall texts is enough to actually, again, slow you down, but also to sort of give you some tools, right, to be able to engage with artworks. And we know that this is particularly the case if the works are like highly abstract, or they're super conceptual, or they're like, let's say, performance art. And you typically, if you're not the person who goes to museums often, and you're not what we would call somebody who's like reading art news and all these things, it's difficult. So you do need to augment that experience with text, and it helps.
And with that in mind, Seth asks, with regard to museum settings, that he sometimes sees viewer reaction to art falling into two observing buckets, either examining technical execution or the meaning and expression of a piece of art. Do you find that emotional reaction connects to a particular type of engagement point of entry like that?
We know that if, so we've done laboratories, most of the studies that we do, we have some sort of art knowledge measure, and that comes at the end of the study. We do it in the museum, and also the laboratory. Yeah, there is. So if you are a person, and I'm going to kind of oversimplify this, but I can send you literature if you want. If you're a person who is highly knowledgeable and really, like, you know, you've taken studio art classes and a bunch of art history classes, you are more sensitive. Your initial kind of interaction with a work really does focus on composition. It focuses on you start relating it to other artworks, and you try to classify and categorize it in terms of style and certain schools of art. If you are less informed and less knowledgeable about art, the focus is a lot on actually the content, like what is being depicted. Or the question is, if it's an abstract artwork, what do I see? Like, what am I supposed to look? What am I looking at? What am I supposed to take away from this? So in terms of access point, it does matter. And it matters as far as the art knowledge. And it also matters how much information the museum itself gives you prior to actually going in and having that one-to-one engagement with the artwork.
Thank you. And earlier you talked about the emotional response to the aesthetic experience. Wondering now if you have any thoughts about what takes place after the aesthetic experience. Does it lead to behavior change or result in any type of action?
We don't know. What we do know is that, so we've done studies where actually my colleague, Jeff Smith, who used to head the research and evaluation department at the Metropolitan Museum, they looked at like engagement and aesthetic experience, beginning, middle, and end. And what they found was, like, at the beginning, when people just, they enter the museum, it's very low. Like they're flustered essentially, right? In the middle, there's a peak of engagement where they're really they slow down, they think about things and they reflect on things. And right when they're about to leave, right, it goes down again. So, but this is in the city, this is in New York. Personally, of course, when I go to a museum, I'm flustered right when I walk in. Took the subway, took the cab, right, walk there. And then now leaving, it's like, oh, I have to do the thing again. Like now I'm out of that sort of comfort zone. But yeah, it does, there is that kind of ebb and flow. It would be great to find out whether that actually changes. So it's not just beginning, middle, end. What if you do beginning kind of somewhere in the middle towards the end, and then end, to see those kinds of, the waves of engagement and reflection, right, and awareness during that experience. That's an open empirical question.
Thank you. And I think we have time for one more question for you. Louise comments, it is said that you remember how an experience made you feel. How do you get audiences to interact with exhibits that are on difficult or not traditionally, quote, beautiful subjects? Does discomfort form a barrier to empathy, or can it be used as a bridge to open a dialogue with the audience? Probably entirely relevant given all that we're facing in our culture right now and the pressure on museums to reimagine themselves.
I think there's a lot of folks on this summit who could answer this, but I'll give it a shot. I think that, well, from research that we've done and just the data over the years, I think that you don't want to take away that discomfort. You sort of want to kind of have visitors recognize it. And a few folks talked about this yesterday, actually. I think Victoria did. And go from there, right? So the traditionally not beautiful or not readily kind of accessible works, information is the key. It's really providing information, but providing a diverse set of information, because you don't know people's access points and where they're kind of what they're comfortable with and what they can use and what would be useful to them. So giving them the choice as far as information, but constantly providing, and it's also, I always think about Vygotsky's idea of scaffolding. We do it in teaching, we do it in the classroom, right? And it's needed in that context. It's the same thing with in museums, because people come in and a lot of folks are intimidated. They don't, a lot of us go to museums often, right? So we know what to do. We sort of know the behaviors. We know like the dance, right? But a lot of folks don't have those tools, and to scaffold them, that's the key. And we do know through studies, scientific ones, that there are tools that we can use, and there are things that we can learn from those studies.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tinio. And back to you, Elif.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pablo. Thank you very much. It was very interesting, and there's lots of comments there, and I hope everybody will get a chance to review all of them. We cannot possibly cover everything, but thank you so much again. Thought-provoking, and I have so many questions. I'll probably reach out to you after the summit, if you don't mind, just to talk about a few of those things. Thank you. So with that, I would like to welcome our next presenter, Anne Fullenkamp, from the Children's Museum of Pittsburgh. She is the Senior Director of Design, and she will discuss emotions from the Children's Museum perspective in a presentation titled, "Can a Playful Exhibit for Children Be Emotional Too?" Welcome, Anne.
Oh, can you see me and see my
Here.
screen? Yes?
Yes, just perhaps
Okay.
click play so it is the full screen.
Okay. Let me see here. Play. Okay. Hello, everybody. Thank you. This segue from Pablo, I think, is great. Today, I'm going to be talking about a new exhibit that we're developing based on the film Inside Out. Our exhibit is called Emotions at Play with Pixar's Inside Out. It's a new traveling exhibit that we're developed in partnership with the creative team at Pixar. And it's, for those of you who may not be familiar with the film, hopefully many of you are. It's a wonderful film. It's about emotions, and the stars of the film are these 5 characters: joy, anger, fear, sadness, and disgust. So it's really a great entry point when we talk about families and children and how to talk and introduce the idea of emotions and how children can really control their emotions. So I'll just what I'm going to do today is go through briefly the overview of the exhibit components that we have in development, and really how we were focusing on specific ideas for this really broad topic. So if you are familiar with the movie, you'll know that there's the characters in the real world, but that the bulk of the film really takes place in the mind world. So when we were developing this, we decided to focus on the mind world exclusively in order to make it as relatable and accessible to as many people as possible, because that's the most interesting thing for us. And when we talk about kids and families and beginning this is what we all human beings have in common. We have these base emotions, and Paulo was saying there's this range of emotions, but at the core, we have to start somewhere. So that's what was brilliant about the team at Pixar, is they honed in on these basics that are relatable, but within that, we know there's a huge range. So for kids, we wanted to focus on some tools that they could use, and especially adults could use too. And that's about identifying your emotions. And that goes to really understanding too that finding the commonality and empathy with others, that I have these feelings and so do you. And so the activities and the exhibits will focus on identifying emotions, that emotions and memories are at work, that emotions, you can control them, and that they are working with you and for you. So we have a lot of experiences where we want kids to understand that they are in control of their emotions, that their emotions don't control them. And that's especially important when you think about the age range that we're really focused on is 8 and under. And when you're kind of beginning to find yourself and your role in the world, understanding that you control your emotions, and that there are tools and ways you can have those emotions work together. And then we really used imagination and storytelling as a jumping off point. We've talked a lot, and yesterday there was talk about theater and how pretend play and storytelling is a great basis, especially for kids to express their emotions. And then if they're not able to articulate their personal feelings, which we know takes, frankly, adults have a hard time articulating our emotions sometimes, but it's really an effective way through storytelling and imagination. So those were our focus points as we went and developed these activities. And I'm just going to go through this quickly. Overall, we absolutely had to start with, we're developing an exhibit about these. So we did use the narrative, the story as a jumping off point, but the place settings of the film are just the beginning. So the exhibit components and the activities are very as open-ended as we could make them. The exhibit it's being built right now. So these are just renderings. But I'll kind of go to some that, especially Paula was just talking about reflection. So one of the activities we have is a interactive mirror. So you'll stand in front of the mirror, you'll see yourself. There'll be, it lights up. There's some action that happens when you stand in front of the mirror, but it's really a way of looking at yourself in relationship to others and putting yourself in the place of the character. We use reflection and mirrors a lot in our exhibits about emotion too, because it's a great way to see for kids, especially when you're in a traveling exhibit and the focus is on play and we don't know what the attention span is. Kids like to look at themselves, they can see each other, and it's amazing how that actually can start conversations. So for those of you who are familiar with the movie, in the mind world, our brain is the control panel, that's headquarters. So this is going to be a main focus of our exhibit. And so we built a control panel. This really is a multisensory experience. We imagine in a less socially distanced world, possibly 4 to 5 kids huddled around there with lots of different ways to engage. But again, this idea that you're in control, you can make choices with multiple people working together, that you have to talk to one another and communicate. So again, there's no strong narrative here. So we wanted to encourage pretend play, but there are lots of different ways to engage. And you also get a lot of immediate feedback. And this series of exhibits is really about memory. And in the movie, there's a strong narrative of the memory orbs. Long-term memories, short-term memories. Joy, the star of the film, is desperate not to preserve the memories of the character. So we have, we introduce these orbs where you're thinking about the current moment and making choices and seeing how memories can change based on the range of emotions. And then we have another experience with these orbs where you can actually write down your current memory or a feeling you're having in the moment and change the color of one of these orbs. So again, introducing this idea that children have control of their emotions, that you can think and contemplate and then reflect back on memories and learn from all of these emotional experiences, both short-term and long-term. We have a couple of experiences that are about balance and working together. It's really important for us to convey that emotions don't work in isolation. It is a diaspora. It is this big giant color wheel. No absolute fine lines between them. So having this continuous message that emotions work together, you need to find balance. You're not all one thing or the other. So seeing how all of these activities and how the different emotions can work together, and they're all different sizes, they're all different shapes, and that emotions change. And here's another one where it's kind of a tilt-whirl balance, but that you are in control of your emotions. We do use these because we're in an interactive children's exhibit, we're hoping people will stay for an hour, but we have to get them quickly. So we do use these active game-like experiences. The nice thing about these things too is often adult caregivers like to play these games with children. So having opportunities to work together, have conversations across an exhibit, and then even having people meet each other and be able to work together and talk about what they're doing. And then we have a stage where you can have complete pretend play. We start with some of the characters, but again, this idea that you can tell stories about emotions, and we're going to have as prompts with possible story starters. So again, this idea of pretend play, storytelling, and then letting the kids tell through their imagination some ways of how they're feeling. And then because, frankly, emotions is such a broad topic, we know that this is really just a starting point of the narratives and an entry point. So we're doing a lot of programs that really talk about the range of emotions and how they change, and then being able to personalize it. One of my favorite is something called Personality Islands. It's where you can sit down, and this is actually a great thing for professional development and for adults too. You can build your personality island out of found objects. And this is a great extension from what the exhibit is starting with the 5 main characters and these kind of play experiences, but then to be able to create some longer term activities and some ideas that could actually extend back home into the classroom to build on the ideas and the big concepts in the exhibits. So it's always a challenge when you're talking about big, complex topics like emotions, but we're in a children's museum with a lot of distractions and trying to keep everyone's attention. So we're really looking forward to this exhibit opening in January. We were delayed by COVID. So we're really looking forward to seeing this. And then the tour will begin next year, and it'll travel in North America. So yeah, and actually I'll mention that this is now our 3rd exhibit that is completely focused on emotions. We did last year, last year I spoke about XOXO, our exhibit about love and forgiveness. And then we have the exhibit, a permanent exhibit that we're opening at the Children's Museum when we reopen in January about kindness. And that'll be, frankly, our new research-based camp about all these topics, social emotional learning, and our research and learning team and the exhibits team have built out a permanent gallery that hopefully we can continue this research and hopefully work with many of you folks here. So thank you.
Thank you. And Greg, if I may, I'm going to just lead us into our next speaker. And thank you so much. This is such a wealth of resource. And I mean, I have so many questions to ask, and we will have a Q&A time after our next speaker. But I say, let's take all this knowledge to places like Google and Facebook, where these people who are actually designing all the emotions and engagements for us can also experience these. So thank you so much. With that, I would like to welcome our next speaker, Halim Flowers, who will be interviewed by another participant, Philippa Hughes. And Halim and Philippa, I'll just leave it to you on the topic of discussion. I know you have a good rapport between the two of you. You have spoken before. So the topic is arts and emotions, and I'll just leave the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to do a very quick introduction of Halim, but it's not going to be adequate. I met Halim very shortly after he was released from prison. He'd been in prison for 22 years. He was sentenced to life as a teenager. And, I found it for me, interesting to hear, to listen and experience his art, to learn how to empathize with a person who could not be more different from me in so many different ways. And so what I want to talk about is how his art helped me to learn more empathy and how it helps others, not just me. It's not just about me, obviously, but also I want to tell you about an experience I had. So right after I met Halim, I invited him to my house for a little gathering. I like to have gatherings. And we started having an argument, of course, because we're in Washington, D.C., about Donald Trump and politics. And there was this one guy who just like really got very emotional and really became very angry about Trump. And then Halim said, I love Trump. I love Donald Trump. And we all like sort of just stopped in our tracks and had to really process that. And so I don't know if you remember that, Halim, but I really had a huge impact on everybody in that space. And so I thought we could, and then you recited a poem. And so I thought you could talk about how, what your thinking is when you say, I love Donald Trump, and how your art expresses your love, emotion of love.
Thank you, Philip. But for me, I know that Donald Trump can be a very polarizing figure. And even though I may not agree with probably not any or most of his views, but I can still love him. And for me, my art reflects an experience that I was deemed to be a super predator by Ivy League progressive scholars. My generation of Black boys were considered fatherless, godless, and jobless as children, and society saw, instead of pour more resources into us to help us to develop into productive human beings, the only solution that they had for us was to put us in cages for the remainder of our lives. And I believe that's like derived from fear, and fear leads to hatred. So for me, once I had an opportunity to stew in my cage for a couple of decades, I realized that no human being is worthy of hate, and no one is that important, even if you disagree with everything that they may think and say. But that individual still is worthy of love. And I hope that my art reflects that. I don't believe that any human being is incorrigible. And I believe even for Donald Trump, that there is still a small glimmer of hope that hopefully one day he may evolve in some of his issues that we just see to not be productive.
Can you talk more about the way you express in your art? Because your art can be very sort of hard hitting. It's really hits you over the head. And so I could see, we talked a little bit earlier about discomfort when an audience looks at your art. And so how do we bridge that discomfort into actually creating a sense of love and empathy?
That's a great question. For me, I see that when I return to society, that most people just exist in bubbles that agree with their ideas and ideals. And people are very afraid to engage with other human beings who have a different opinion from them. Instead of more getting to the goal, which I think is the betterment of humanity, people get more caught up in just being right? So for me, I believe my art reflects that dichotomy. Like just to my right, I have a painting that I did today here that's about race and Jesse Owens and, redlining. But then right here, you see a painting right here, just say that love is the antibody. So for me, I just believe that, life is dichotomous. We all wrestle with this internal pull between positive and negative charge on an atomic level. And, and what we deem to be good and evil is so subjective and is so culturally biased that I think that we have to approach, I as an artist, I have to approach subject matter with that level of open-mindedness, humility, but also raw imagery and text that address issues that most people are just afraid to talk about, especially with people who think opposite than what they think. So I really just want to be like you, just create conversations through artwork, truth and reconciliation conversations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what Pablo was saying earlier, is about we have to give people the tools to process what we're seeing. And I think another way you do it so well is through your poetry. So I met Halim as a poet first, but then now, can you talk more about how you integrate the poetry with the visual? I mean, those create some digital tools for understanding.
That takes from the lady who did the Pride Talk. I think it's dope that they're doing things with the children and art and expressing their emotions. For me, I grew up in a community that had the highest murder rate in the country. And then as children, just being raised in an environment, we were encouraged to be like, especially socially constructed boys and men, who were taught to not cry, to be callous and cold, and to be violent and mean. And so for me, it's like, going back to the question that you asked, it's like, dang, what was the question? Because I went off on a tangent. What was the question you asked again?
I know. I was just thinking about I like the way you.
The poetry. Right. So being incarcerated, I didn't have access to paint and canvases and oil sticks, and I learned about Basquiat through listening to Jay-Z. I had no access to museums and galleries and other artists and gallery owners. So the only thing that I can do in prison was write. So I developed this practice of, writing poetry, sharing my pain and my love and my joy through my pen. And then once I was released, I started doing spoken word. And then once I had gained a couple of fellowships, like with Halcyon Arts Lab and Echo and Green, I had the resources and the ability to be able to obtain paints and canvases and cameras. So I just started out just taking the poetry and putting it on images from the Wall Street Journal and pictures of me in shackles and chains as a 16-year-old child. And when the quarantine came, I just had received a grant from the Art for Justice Fund. Shout out to Agnes Gunn and the Art for Justice Fund. And I took that and I just invested in the canvases and paint, because I feel like as one who's completely invested in this radical love revolution, and someone who is creative, I have to use everything at my disposal, whether it's imagery, text, paint, photography, newspapers, anything that I can just grab my hands on and use it as a tool in the interest of love.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking, like, how can we have more conversations? I mean, you're really good. We've had a lot of conversations like this, but I want to like expand our universe of people listening to what you have to say. Like, what's the next step?
The next step for me is like, I'm in my new studio in Manhattan. So coming from DC to Manhattan, I have access now to like 8 million people. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to use my art and my voice and my books and my love. And I'm just going to engage. I'm going to do my best to engage with as many people who don't share my socially constructed backgrounds of race, class, gender, creed, and sexuality. And I'm going to encourage people to do the same. So that way we can begin to see each other in spite of the social constructs that's been used to divide us. Get a little bit away from these identity politics that's polarizing us as a nation and as humanity, and just use my creativity just to drive these conversations along these ideological lines that separate people, and just bring people together. Just get people used to being with someone that supports Trump. Like, it's okay if they support Trump. We don't support Trump, but let's hear them out why they do, and let's share why we don't, and let's do it in a humane and a loving way, and just hope that we can get to a better solution for humanity as a whole.
Yeah. I kind of like this question that somebody just asked in the, sorry, Alif, I'm just going to look over here in the chat bit. Nancy just asked, can you teach us your language? I don't know exactly what you mean by that, but what do you think? What do you think? What is your language?
Well, one of my gallery owners, he asked me what was my visual art language. What is it and how do I share it? So for me, my language is just like love, and love that's derived from open-mindedness and humility, and unconditional love. Even love, conceptualizing what loves look like in the interest of someone who hates you and wants to harm you, but not confining it to, like, when you say that, to like a Mahatma Gandhi, Dr. King actualization, but something that reflects your own individual aesthetic in the cultural environment of the 21st century. So for me, that's just my language. My language is just love, and love is caring and empathy and compassion and understanding and willingness for everyone unconditionally all the time. irregardless of social constructs.
I feel like you're an art piece unto yourself too. You're like, the ambassador for empathy, and your art is like just, it's just really almost from the expression, right? But you yourself embody. Do you feel yourself in that way?
I don't, for me, I'm just committed to love. Even if I know life is dichotomous, so it's gonna be some moments that I don't actualize that in the best way. That's just the dichotomy of life, but giving myself space to be dichotomous and forgiving myself. And that what keeps me humble. That's what keeps me in a state of humility. Knowing that we all have that potential for that dichotomy to, even though we may be the most well-intentioned people, but sometimes we think and we say and we do things that are harmful. And that just keeps me, I'm always just willing to forgive everyone and not get stuck on a person's worst stance or worst moment, and doing the work that's necessary to working with them and others to get to the best solution. So, but I am who I am. That's one of the answer. My gallery owner, one of them asked me what makes my art different. And I was like, that's not a question for me to answer. I'm not trying to be different. I'm not trying to be anything. I'm just being. We get so caught up in trying, right, instead of being. So I'm just being. I'm just embracing all of me. And I'm not ashamed of my past, or my present, or my future. I am who I am.
Yeah. I feel like we could just kind of talk forever, Elif. So you tell me if we should continue, because there's a lot of commentary too.
Well, yes, thank you very much, Philippa. And thank you, Halim, for your inspiration. As you can see in the chat box, folks are really quite inspired and moved by your presence and your art.
The new website in the chat box, because I saw the one that was put in there. That's the old one. So I'm gonna put the recent one and the recent TED that I did. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And I wonder if we might be able to bring Pablo and Zorana in on this conversation with you, given the presentations they offered earlier today. Zorana, are you with us?
And also Anne, because children's emotions
Anne,
are
yes, of
part
course.
of it, right?
Here.
I'm here.
Zorana, Pablo, and any reflections or thoughts based on what we've just heard?
I think Halim is a wonderful example of embracing emotions and transforming them for the future and bridging past, present, and future. And that openness of full range of experience and the understanding that this is the goal, this love is the goal, but yes, sometimes you're not going to succeed. And that is not the reason enough to stop it. We sometimes don't succeed.
So
Thank you.
One thing that I always come away with and remember is that children are really smart. We know that. And especially when we talk about exhibits or experiences, you don't have to talk down to children. They can have, and sometimes, especially when we talk about this climate, a really mature conversation, sometimes more mature conversations than adults have, because they're learning, they're open. Halim, what you were talking about, we all know that they're experiencing things for the first time. So I think as adults, it's really our responsibility to put out that open-mindedness, the acceptance, this idea of conversation and give and take. It's so important to get them when you can do it 3, 4, 5, 6, because by the time we hit, and for the doctors on this call, you know this, by the time you're 8, you're kind of, you form opinions, you're getting your biases, you're kind of going down that road. But I guess that's what I get so excited about. And whether it's art, it's this open-endedness, it's finding these ways to kind of bridge these gaps without, and whether it's through play or through art. But I mean, that's the one thing with all these conversations, to remember that we have to start early, because it's hard to unlearn something. And that if there are things that we can and that remembering that we as adults are really modeling that little pictures have big ears. It's true. And that they're looking and they're seeing, and whether there's children in your world or just people you encounter in public, that children are paying attention and they learn all of this from us. So not to dismiss them or not to wait to have these conversations about emotions and empathy until we're in high school, which it often has, because then you're unlearning things, and that's always harder. And Halim, I mean, so inspiring.
Thank you.
Just, thank you for that, Halim. I'm reminded of these really powerful pieces that are, super controversial, that are, with security guards in museums guarding them. They're people want to deface them. Like I forgot the artist's name, but the work probably called Piss Christ, right? And what Anne was saying, it's like, you walk in there, you see something you don't agree with. That's the challenge I think that we have. Regardless of the kind of work that we're involved in, how do we promote that openness? How do we get this idea that, I disagree with this piece? And one, how do we kind of get them to accept their feelings? Of course, that's, we can't discount the emotions, but at the same time, kind of go beyond that and say, okay, let me see what's happening here. Let me see why this piece is one, what was the artist's intention, right? And I know, like, I'd love to see more of your work, just for that question of how you're putting together all of these things within the images that you create, and sort of the range of emotions. So many questions, really, but it's like intensity, right? For me, it was just intense, and it brings to mind all these other pieces in artworks throughout history that were so controversial. So thank you for talking about it and showing us some of your works.
Greg, it's Emily Foster. Could I make a comment, please?
Yes, please.
I just want to throw a global perspective on this conversation about an artist who is sharing his experiences about being incarcerated for what I gather was a couple of decades. I'm a Brit and then a Canadian before I was American. And I think we all know in this country that this is one of the most incarcerating countries in the world, where life sentences and solitary confinement and exclusion are sort of the norm. 40 years ago, when I was a young assistant professor in geology at the University of Saskatchewan in the Canadian Prairies, I was mandated as a junior professor to teach off-site, and I did so at a maximum security penitentiary in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, where I was exposed to, inside the walls of this high wall prison, so-called inmates or prisoners, I don't think we have a very good term, who had committed violent armed robbery, and for whom some of the maximum sentences were 6 years. So that I had sort of the unusual experience of teaching some of these men, and then seeing them come on campus within the time frame of my appointment at that university. I would just say that our system is very punitive, and most other countries are restorative. And what is being described to us as an exception would actually be quite commonly an experience that you'd find in other countries, particularly Scandinavian countries, where the system is not inclined to do what this system in this country does.
Emily, thank you so much for your perspective and reminding us of a global reach. If we could, I think this is a terrific opportunity to wrap our morning. Elif, I'll turn the stage back over to you.
I think this is probably the most difficult wrapping up, if there is such a thing. So I will not wrap this up. Let's keep continuing, the conversation and have more dialogue amongst this group and others who may join us, because this is happening here now, but it is also beyond us. And I think we need to get out of I personally speaking, I feel like I need to get out of my own bubble and see the world. And it is a journey that is, learning journey, right? It is continuous, but it has to be done with humility and humbleness. And just like Micah said the other day, the arc always bends towards justice. So I believe that sticking with the arc, we cannot go wrong. You know, anything can change. There are so many uncertainties, so many things that we have no control over. But by being just the presence, also that's what Venerable Priyadarshi said on our first day, right? He mentioned this term the Buddhists use, kundun, it's the loving presence. Just by being present in the world, we have this energy that we emanate outside, and this is contagious. And I'm very emotional right now. I can hardly talk, but I really, even with this virtual crowd here, I can feel this. So I hope we will all take this with us and keep the conversation going. Thank you very much to all of our presenters from this morning, Zorana, Pablo, and Halim. This is a very interesting transition time for you. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to be with us and sharing your perspective. And Philippa, thank you so much for making this conversation possible. That we definitely want more, and we'll talk how to do that. Talk how to get there. Okay, thank you so much, everybody.
Thank
And
you.
I'll see you. What time is it now? It is 12:35. I will be here in 10 minutes. If anybody wants to join me for a chat or sharing their work, so there will be a community. The meeting will be on. So see you in 10 minutes. We can now segue into our the rest of our program, scheduled program. And I would like to welcome Laurie Stewart from Woodland Park Zoo. She is the Director of Impact, and she will share with us the findings about their empathy project, a theory of change, empathy, and pro-conservation behavior. Looking forward to it. Thanks, Laurie.
Thank you, Elif, and thank you. Good morning and good afternoon to all of you. I'm really excited to be joining this particular summit. I appreciate all of the great conversations that are happening, and I'm happy to say that, you know, in the background, Laurel, who's one of my colleagues here at Woodland Park Zoo, and I have been taking quite a few notes on how this really informs the theory of change work that we're doing. And all I wanted to do today was sort of present the train of thought that we're currently in as we look at empathy, fostering empathy for animals through interactions with animals, and how we then utilize that to move people to pro-conservation behavior, because that's the end mission, of course, for zoos and aquariums. Oops. So I'm here also representing a learning network that we help to administer. It's 21 AZA, so the Association for Zoos and Aquariums accredited organizations. And one of the reasons that we're starting with AZA accredited organizations is because to achieve that accreditation, we have to show very high levels of animal welfare. So we are working with people that we trust are already doing best practices and how they work with their animals and how they work with people. And with that not being a question in our group, we can move forward, you know, deeper into looking at things like empathy. So that network is called the Advancing Conservation Through Empathy for Wildlife. And this year we created a charter, and in that charter, the network has identified their vision of the world as a conservation-minded society globally that's motivated by empathy towards all life. Zoos and aquariums, of course, we see as a very unique place to be developing that empathy for animals. I heard in the last couple of days, some people who have connected the fact that awe and wonder seem to be a gateway into empathy. And we certainly are able to instigate a lot of that awe and wonder through the engagements at the zoo or aquarium or a nature center. We happen to have a lot of strengths in building those early connections. So social emotional learning, very early experiences with animals, and really getting kids to see some of the similarities and have some of those engagements with animals directly. And then of course, because of the breadth of animals that a lot of us have in our organizations, we really do spend a lot of time trying to encourage those new perspectives. So if you love the giraffe, will you also be able to love the the snake. And so please forgive my really simplistic graphics here, but this is one of the ways that I sort of explain what we're trying to do. So we recognize that participants who come to a zoo or aquarium probably have relationships with animals in some way. So I think a lot of our work, a lot of conversations happen in very urban areas. And even so, we see a lot of people with pets. So this happens to be a vision of my world. I have a black lab in my house. So I spend a lot of time, right, becoming very familiar with her. She has a lot of similarities to me because we're both mammals. We both live the same lifestyle because we're in the same house, eating the same meals, basically. But then there are also people who do live in areas, even urban areas, where they have relationships to the animals around them. And for me in particular, I have a strong relationship in my life to moose. Moose live in my yard, have lived in my yard often, and I can even come to know them as individuals. I recognize them by their fur pattern. They may come back year after year, and I'm able to track which females, for example, have had which calves, and then I sort of follow the calves. So I have relationships with animals, not just in my direct purview, but also within my community. And so something that a zoo could do, and the Alaska Zoo, for example, does have a moose in their among their habitats or exhibits. And so Molly the moose could be there, and zoo staff could really be using Molly to help better inform the participant about what moose need, who they are. And then I learned things that help me to have a better relationship and more empathy with the moose that live in my community. However, what we're wondering is if, as we take this global view, if I'm connecting the participant to somebody like a rhinoceros named Taj, I can give Taj a name, and I can talk about his attributes, and I can talk about his agency, and you can see that he's also a mammal that's very similar to my dog and has a lot of similarities to me. There's a familiarity and proximity that I can go and visit Taj every day and get to know him as an individual. I can read stories on social media from the zoo that tell me how Taj is doing, and I can really have a relationship built on empathy. What we're wondering is, can we take that relationship that we can build to an animal outside of the community and bridge that into relationships with those same animals in the wild, where we are not going to know those animals as individuals, and we're not going to be close to them. We don't feel that we have a direct impact on them. And in many ways, we don't really want to encourage people to go into those wild populations and get to know them as individuals. So what is that empathy that moves, great, thank you, Laurel, that moves from knowing one individual to having that empathy and care for the larger group out in the wild? And that becomes a lot more difficult, of course, when you start to look at things like dung beetles and snakes and cockroaches, where out in the wild, they're barely knowable as an individual, perhaps because of their short life or how dissimilar they are to us. But then in the wild, they're relatively invisible, part of an ecosystem. In big communities, they're really not knowable in that same way. And then our group has talked about, I heard this reflected in conversations here, we are also looking at how do we also build those bridges with plants or with landscapes or with ecosystems, so those larger natural systems as well. And then I was just going to touch on anthropomorphism because it has come up in this group as well, that at least in our work, we see anthropomorphism now as a very important tool. And this is a really big shift for zoos and aquariums who used to want to not show animals as individuals for a number of reasons. And one is that there was actually concern that visitors becoming too attached to any individual animal meant that they were paying too, I don't want to say paying too close attention in the sense that that they were worried about the welfare. Like, we were still transparent, we were still taking very good care of those individuals, but animals have accidents, they have medical conditions, and then at some point they do pass away. And there was concern that visitors being so attached meant that we were going to have to be emotional with the visitors, and that was a very uncomfortable space for us. But we've shifted now and realized that anthropomorphism is a really great tool for being able to show similarities, not only in animals that are easily familiar to us, but they really help us to highlight similarities in animals that are quite different from us. So we really need to pair that anthropomorphism, though, not only with that emotional connection that people have to an animal, but to knowledge. And I know that's come up a lot in the last couple of days as well. You really have to have that knowledge piece to have the informed empathy that leads to action. So really quickly, we really see 3 forms of empathy as informing our work. So at the zoo, we can have animal encounters and stories to really build that trust and awe and work on that affective feeling empathy. Then we use imagination, anthropomorphism, activities to build curiosity and play that starts to build that knowledge piece that helps us then bridge into what we're calling the compassionate or informed empathy. And this is still a bridge that we're trying to figure out in our theory of change. How do we take all of the feelings and the knowledge and turn that into behavior, not just at an individual level, but also at a community level? And so finally, I'll wrap up that as we're thinking about this, and one reason I was so excited to participate in the summit this week is that we realize that the zoos and aquariums, nature centers, we're really part of a larger ecosystem of contact and knowledge. And we wonder, as has been said here too, is it really empathy if it doesn't lead to conservation action? And is it really empathy or conservation action if it doesn't include empathy for the humans who also live in those areas and have relationships with the animals? I think this is a really key piece that we're wrestling with, and I'm excited for all of the work here and all the disciplines and experts represented to help feed into that conversation. Again, seeing ourselves as an ecosystem in the lifespan of any individual or any community that we work with, and how individuals are influenced by the communities they're from, the cultural frameworks that they grew up within, their families, the schools that they go to, and then how many of our partners are in the museums or libraries, mental health organizations. People grow into different work cultures. How are we an ecosystem of learning and, again, contact? What continuity might we provide within all of our conversations to help emphasize and grow this work together? Thank you.
Lori, thank you so much, Lori. This was, and I think we'll have a Q&A time with you and Kate, and then we'll open it up to questions. Thank you so much. And I certainly have a few questions for you coming up. With that, I would like to now welcome our next speaker, Dr. Kate Kristen, Senior Manager, Smithsonian Facilities at the Smithsonian Institution. Talking about the ecosystem, I think Smithsonian is definitely an ecosystem in its own. So Kate, looking forward to hearing your presentation on embodying sustainability and affecting wellness at Smithsonian, a trajectory.
Thank you, Elif. And I would say that ecosystem, Smithsonian as ecosystem, you may be channeling the way this, well, I'll just jump right in and see, because here we go. So Venerable Tenzin spoke on day 1 about the need to take time to dictate the emotional tone you were bringing to this world, and suggested that as an individual, organization, institution, or state, you can bring yourself along to bringing kindness, compassion, a sense of joy to your interactions and your interlocutors by choosing how you choose to dictate this emotional tone. So in the midst of being in such a stimulated and real-time processing state that I personally am in at this moment, as I'm real-time experiencing this bathing in the kindness, compassion, joy, and evidence, as Lori just brought up again, that each of you has already brought to this interneural, interdomestic segment of our 3 years journey with Elif on conversing and thinking and working on empathy. Given that heightened emotional state of my own, nonetheless, in the next few minutes, I'm going to try to read out a bit of my own personal snapshot sketch of where I think Smithsonian is right now, the institution at present in its own process of taking time to think about how it can dictate the emotional tone and empirical goodnesses that it can provide, and that it's gearing up into offering to this present world. I'm certain I'm not going to get it all right, and for sure I won't tie things together enough, but we'll try. And hopefully I may be able to connect to what's in my abstract, otherwise you'll just have to reread that. But because that's about the pan-institutional possibilities that are embodied in how Smithsonian Facilities has already been working on carbon drawdown, carbon neutral, and how all these parts of Smithsonian that are interested in that are coming more and more closer and closer to really working together on embodying that. So that's the end in case I don't get to it. Smithsonian right now is experiencing life as everywhere else is experiencing it, where systems and institutions and aggregations of individuals were all in a place of great promise and simultaneously a place of significant retrenchment. And that retrenchment, that necessity of retrenchment, but also the opportunity for retrenchment is a really good part of the promise. I think that stripping down and stripping away that we're all dealing with, hopefully, everywhere and also at Smithsonian is going to be getting us further and further toward the essential and the goodness that we're empathically trying to get to. So, you know, think about garden editing where you've got your garden growing and somewhere during the seasons of the year you snip or you trim or you just lop wholesale. The gooseberry, you cut it back into a V shape in the fall, and the elderberry, you slam it down to knee height in February, and the forsythia, just whack it back as much as you can any time of the year. Basically, you retrench them because then they gain the strength to grow back up into parts of this whole of the garden that you're building over the years. And Smithsonian, like all the museums and research institutions and similar institutional nodes in the world of vast cultural import, all these places that the squares I'm seeing in front of me, all of you are with and from and connect in with. Smithsonian's experiencing that wicked whiplash of sudden closure and frantic and dynamic digitizing and super planning for cautious, creeping but bold reopenings. Now we're up to about 7 of our 19 museums and zoo facilities being reopened to some extent. We've got ad hoc committees looking at to what extent visiting people are properly mask wearing once they get beyond our gates and our doorways to signal these people. We're looking, how do we signal these people to provoke them to not just comply, but also to really join in active visitor institutional mutual collaboration on wellness and safety. And we have revenue falling out and we have impossible to avoid forever layoffs, but also our leadership and our staff are somehow really keeping it together and envisioning some trenchant emerging future whose basic outlines are becoming apparent. And it's like the high level institutional signal and then all the crazy internal jamboree of signals that happen at Smithsonian are coming together and, you know, across the science units, across the arts units, across everything. And they're really focusing on some really key things right now. And there was a staff survey this spring with an amazing 72% response, not where people were being forced to respond, where they chose to respond, because Smithsonian is this crazy behemoth with terrible bureaucratic problems and institutional issues, and yet 72% of the staff were just thrilled to give their responses on things. And basically, and we're moving in this, and that was something that the secretary of the Smithsonian, who we were very lucky to have, Lonnie Bunch, our new secretary from within, was appointed last July before this stuff happened. And all of it's coming together, the sort of noisy signals and the signaling noises and everything else to principles of, you know, of the forward focus that we mean to be in the next period of what Smithsonian is going to be living as our principles and as the embodiments of these. And clearly the top ones, it hasn't been totally announced yet, but it's coming out, is diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion as an organizing principle, responsibility of pandemic response. And another part of it is this life on a sustainable planet. And so to my mind and to others, one of the big questions right now is how to organize these 6,000 staff members, all the disciplines, all the units that any other place would call a separate institution. Smithsonian has, 1932, depending on how you count it, units separately, how to organize all of this together into really supporting that kind of thing of sustainable planet. And now that I have been working with Smithsonian facilities for a long time, and they've been working on sustainability issues, carbon drawdown issues for such a long time. And it's a really interesting fact that all these other parts of Smithsonian, which individually have also been working on them, I think we have an opportunity to get together and to be connecting. And one of the great beacons I'm seeing is that the head of our occupational health division is embracing the idea of sustainability and wellness together as part of what we do, not only for our, well, as occupational health, it's that staff, which is not just a research elite, but it's really a representative public of service workers, security guards, administrators, facilities managers, and a much smaller cohort of educators and researchers. And we're seeing, you know, with 6,000 people at Smithsonian, it's like we're embodying our big world, our own world, and trying to create a world of sustainable planet within Smithsonian, and then finding the ways that that connects out to the products that we're working on for the United States and for the rest of the world in this kind of embrace of all of that, dictating that sort of embrace of these forward moving and very empathic elements. And I guess thinking about my commitment or thinking about what the heck am I trying to do here, I really feel as though I'm seeing mirrors we've talked about of all the different elements of Smithsonian, the arts, the sciences, the humanities, and then what's going on in this group, this empathy group, and the many, many places you are in and of and represent, and the ways in which this group has expanded out in terms of disciplines, in terms of people's life experiences, in terms of institutional sizes and shapes. And I'm just in my head, I'm really working hard at trying to figure out what are the best ways I can help to optimize those connections among all of those elements. And I've left most of it out, but I'm going to stop there.
Kate, thank you so much. And I'm just going to jump in for a quick remark before Greg moderates our Q&A. But I think, you know, what you're saying really is like, you know, we talked about empathy and, you know, from different angles, but sustainability is really empathy in action, right? It is the active taking action phase of empathy. And there has been some discussion early on and throughout the summit, you know, what is really empathy? Is empathy without an action? And I believe Seth Frankel put a post in the chat about Dalai Lama's response to that very question that was posed by Portland Children's Museum students. So these students were learning about this methodology. They created their own sort of ecosystem of compassion, what leads to compassion. And I think, I don't remember exactly all the components, but I think, you know, observe, think, and take action. You know, at the end it was take action, but it feels like four different components. And there's the students' question to Dalai Lama with which the director relayed at our meeting to Dalai Lama was that, you know, if you do all these steps, but if you don't take action, is it still empathy? And you can find in Seth's remarks directly, you know, how Dalai Lama responded to that. And basically it is no. I mean, you have to act. If it is true empathy in a way that it prompts one to act. And thank you so much for leading that effort at the Smithsonian. And it's such a complex structure.
And if I speak to that just for a moment, and to make it clear, I'm not, there are so many people leading the effort, and I'm happy to be working with the director of facilities on elements of it. But I do think that one of the great signals about action taking opportunities right now is that our secretary has clearly enunciated the words climate change and the ability to address climate change. And I think, frankly, sustainability to some extent is a euphemistic term that still has many, many purposes to use, but I'm really fascinated over the next several months how we are able to expand just exactly that vocabulary as we talk more and more about concerted action within Smithsonian in terms of thinking about, sustainable planet, but thinking about carbon drawdown, thinking about climate change. The very fact of those words, which, whereas back in an earlier regime in Smithsonian, you were not even allowed to say conservation during the dark times in the early 2000s. So you have caught the essence of the ramblings that I'm saying, Elif, the fact that we are getting to action.
Thank you. And one more comment and tying into Lori's presentation, because I think the two subjects are related definitely, is that, one thing that I've learned from participating Woodland Park Zoo and Seattle Aquarium's Empathy Project is that first of all, that was a world that I had no familiarity with, right? All these people working in the zoos and aquariums, and they mostly have science background, and they love their animals that are under their care, animals and other living beings that are under their care. But what struck me was that it was almost like they were not allowed to talk about that love. They couldn't call it love. They couldn't anthropomorph. I cannot even say that word. Please, one of you say it. Thank you. They were not even allowed to go that way. Whereas this is how we relate. This is how we connect and feel, belong. So terminology and language is so important. And these, institutional changes with research and evidence-based hopefully will also allow us to use the right language. And I posted a quote from Venerable Priyadarshi's book this morning at the very beginning of the chat box about this ancient Indian philosopher, a seeker. He basically said, he's basically describing empathy as we describe it today, but he says, well, I call this experience love, and you can call it whatever name you want. And then he goes on to describe his philosophy. So, thank you so much. I'll just end it there. And Greg, please, if you can direct a few more questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elif, and thank you, Catherine and Lori. Fascinating and interrelated topics. A couple of comments and questions directed towards you, Lori, and the work you're doing. One is a comment from my colleague and friend, Lottie Lent at the GW Museum Education Program, who says that a lot of the work that you're doing seems like Jerome Bruner theory in action, the notion of facilitating experience by scaffolding on existing knowledge and relationships, making that connection from animals as pets to anthropomorphism to animals and ecosystem. And I too, in my classes, have just been talking about Bruner in that context. Wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
I am not familiar with that work, but from your description of it, that certainly sounds accurate, that we start with assumptions around everyone is capable of empathy, right? And those pathways exist, and that everyone comes to the zoo from some context as well and some experiences. And so starting from that place, we know that we have to scaffold onto where they are. And that's part of the question about in the universal scaffolding of all informal and formal learning opportunities across a person's lifetime, where do any of us fit into people's growth along the way?
And a related comment from Studio Tectonic, mentioning visitor conservation action and the note that many zoos, aquariums, natural history exhibitions use approaches that assume that emotional connection and empathy will lead to a desired openness for knowledge, and then that leads to understanding, and that understanding leads to conservation action. What are you all finding regarding the effectiveness of this approach in exhibitions, or is there another way of thinking about it?
Sure, and I would encourage Jim, if you either in the comments or you could spotlight him and see what his thoughts are in this area as well. I think that we are still, one thing that we worked on a little bit more than that process was people's perceptions. How do people perceive animal welfare? That's where our research is focused in the last couple of years. And just trying to think of what we learned around that really informed the way that then our animal keepers work with animals. Sorry, I'm having so many thoughts that they're crowding together and I'm aware of the time. So that's what's happening right now, is a glut of thoughts. We are still evolving. So another piece of research that occurs to me, and I don't have the reference, but I could try to find it, also said that for a lot of cultures, that is often the process and the way they approach. And I read something that in American culture that often action comes first, and then we backfill to why is that the action that you're taking? So that sometimes if we can move a community and make something more of a social norm, some of that emotional work may happen after. So that's also an approach that we're taking to that question.
Thanks so much. And then I want to direct a question to Catherine. From your position at the Smithsonian, of course, a renewed focus on diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion across the organization. I know that the Smithsonian has long been focused on accessibility, obviously your Office of Accessibility. How is Secretary Bunch and this renewed focus impacting that part of your work?
Specifically the accessibility?
Particularly, but generally, DEAI.
Oh, I guess in general, there's no question that it's clearly that, and frankly, other similar elements. I would say that there's a sense that things are being truly embraced, and that there is real opportunity to work across units. And when we say units, it's with a capital U, it's the different, whether it's different museums, different programs, and that that not only can you be doing your work in your unit, but also these are themes and focuses that people are always trying to bridge and move across units. It's one of the most exciting things about being at Smithsonian is to do that. But there are certainly structures, institutional structures that are being built and strengthened along the lines of those topics and those imperatives that are allowing allowing for better flow across those units. So though we are a 19th century institution and kind of creaky in some ways, things like this are really helping us with these 21st century opportunities. And I think we see it in what's going on with our education, many of the pan-institutional or cross-institutional elements, including education, including facilities, et cetera. So it's an encompassing that is giving opportunity for better flow in that way.
Well, having started my museum career in the education department at the Air and Space Museum, I am particularly inspired and empowered by some of the real commitment to change that we're seeing. And I do think it relates to empathy directly. Thank you very much, Catherine and Lori. Elif, I'll turn it back to you now.
Thank you again to our speakers, Kate and Lori. Thank you very much for being here. And with that, I would like to move us into our next group of speakers. I'd like to welcome Susie Wilkening from Wilkening Consulting. And she will share with us her research on curiosity, empathy, and inclusive attitudes. What audience research tells us. Thank you, Susie.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Is my speaker working okay? Because it doesn't always. Excellent. Yeah. I am going to go ahead and share my screen here. There we go. So since 2018, in that summit we had in India, I've been examining how curiosity and empathy affect prosocial outcomes, especially around attitudes around and towards inclusion among museum goers in particular. At this point, I'm now working on an inclusive practice primer that uses radical curiosity and courageous empathy to consider less inclusive viewpoints, how they came to be, and how we can effectively open up more people towards inclusion. What I'm going to give you today is a very brief preview. You see it says version 2.0. I'm working on version 3.0. And it says extremely abbreviated. So there's a lot more to this, but hopefully this just gives you a good idea of where we're going. There's a lot of research that has fed into this. I'm not going to read through this, but to date, we've surveyed over 60,000 museum goers around these issues, and also about 5,000 members of the broader population, and had over 500 individuals in qualitative panels giving us their really deep insights and thoughts and feelings around these issues. So there's a huge amount of research that has fed into this over the past couple of years. And what we've learned is some of it is very basic, that, you know, we all, every single museum goer, all of us, have our own idiosyncratic values, attitudes, and beliefs, our idiosyncratic worldviews that affect how we view content. And that's put together by all of our life experiences that you see around this image on the slide. So lots of these things coming in, affecting how the museum goers approach the content that you're sharing in museums. In the research, over and over, we kept finding the same thing, that there was a really strong clustering of values, attitudes, and beliefs that affect how people view the past in particular, also how they view art and culture, and the content that museums share, and is very much reflected in the current polarization in our society. So we're looking at a spectrum of values, attitudes, and beliefs. And the ends of the spectrum are the ones where most people tend to congregate. So we have this traditional end of the spectrum segment of individuals who tend to be more politically and socially conservative, somewhat less engaged with museums and culture on average, generally have lower levels of engagement with their community and the broader world on average. When it comes to inclusion, they tend to be what I call status quo. They're not seeking inclusive content from museums, but they're not necessarily rejecting it, or they are deliberately avoiding it, or they might be vocally opposed to it. And some of the historic sites in particular really deal with this on an everyday basis sometimes, where they start getting these charges of revisionist history all the time. A strong feeling among this group that museums should be neutral. They have a traditional, often celebratory approach to history and their own culture. They have pride in past, their own cultural heritage. Overall, lower levels of curiosity, and demographically tend to be older, more male, have lower levels of educational attainment, but not always. The other end of that spectrum is what we call the neoteric cluster. They tend to be more politically and socially liberal, overall higher levels of engagement with museums and culture, higher levels of engagement with the community and the broader world, much more likely to be inclusive in their attitudes. So we do have people in this group that are also that status quo, not seeking, not rejecting group. Museums can take an evidence-backed position. They welcome that. They have an additive approach to the past and to history and culture, wanting to add on different layers and different perspectives. Overall, more curious, especially what's called eudaimonic curiosity. And demographically, they tend to be younger, more likely to be female, and have higher levels of educational attainment, but not always. So we just got to keep that in mind. My 95-year-old, very white stepfather is very neoteric, but there can also be young women who are people of color who are traditional. So that happens, it's just, it tends to be in these clusters. So we end up with this spectrum. And we have about equal parts traditional neoterics in the spectrum. And then we have a little bit of a group in the middle, but most people tend to go one way or the other. So when it comes to inclusive attitudes, the number one predictor of those clusters is political persuasion. And what we find is that people who are conservative are much less likely to be inclusive in their attitudes than people who are liberal. So we see that breakdown among these museum goers in particular, and then we also see where museum professionals fall. The big takeaway here, though, is that the majority of museum goers are not proactively inclusive. We're estimating about 41%, so about 2 in 5 of our museum goers are seeking and wanting inclusion from museums. We have a big challenge ahead of us because of that. On the other side of that, though, only about 1 in 5 are actually avoiding it or being vocal about saying, no, don't do this. We have a large status quo group that is what we have to work with and try to bring into that more inclusive fold. And how do we use curiosity and empathy to do that? And overall, what I see, especially among those who are anti-inclusive or who are kind of rejecting it or avoiding it, is a lot of fear. There is so much fear out there, very strong, palpable, and defensive fears. And it's around the future, America themselves, the truth, and society. And so we realize that we're dealing with fear, so much fear. It comes out as anger, but it's really rooted in fear that helps us to think about how do we use that radical curiosity and courageous empathy in our practice and interpretation to understand where they're coming from. We don't have to agree with it. I'm not saying that at all. Understand where they're coming from and starting to work with that and have a more productive conversation and maybe bring people more into that inclusive fold, especially since expanding our audiences to those who desperately want more inclusive and equitable content is really important. And actually, the broader public is more likely to want inclusive content from museums than museum goers. And I'm seeing that consistently in the broader population work. So there's a lot more to that, but I want to just wrap it up with a very quick 10-step primer of inclusive practice that all that huge amount of research kind of fed into. This kind of give you a sense of how do we actually do this work. And the first step is acknowledging your bias from the beginning and putting it out there, encouraging your visitors to do likewise. I have found that visitors, when asked in a non-threatening way to think about their own biases, almost all of them can say, yeah, you know, I'm human. I have biases. Just putting that mindset that we all have biases, acknowledge it, and then say, this is how we're working on it. Reinforce aspirational identity among your visitors. They're curious, they're open-minded, they're well-rounded. Those are all key words that are really important to our visitors, especially that well-rounded one among more traditional museum goers. Reinforce that aspirational identity because by putting them in that mindset, it actually makes it a little bit easier for them to understand, take in, and not resist new content or perspectives. We want them to be in an open mindset, not a defensive one. Spark curiosity. There's different kinds of curiosity. That's going to be in the version 3.0 of the primer, but looking at different kinds of curiosity. How do you spark that curiosity to open up those worldviews and enjoy that ride to unexpected conclusions? Engage in dialogic questions. One of the things that more traditional audiences, less inclusive audiences often say is, just give me the facts, I will make up my own mind. That is a very constant comment we get from that segment of museum goers. So they actually really like being asked them what they think. So ask them those questions, but you're in charge of what those questions are and changing what those questions are for them. So engage in those dialogic questions, present them those questions they may not have considered, and ask them to say, you know, well, consider this, because that's a non-threatening way of asking something they may not have expected and to then take in and respond to. But you have to also practice courageous empathy by being open to their answers. It's about mutual respect here too, to keep that defensive response from happening. Then give them the facts. Give them all the facts. They are asking for all the facts. Give them all the facts. But that includes multiple perspectives and telling the truth even when it's not what they're looking for. It means trusting your audience with the facts, that information that you're trying to share. That trust has to cut both ways. So showing your work. I'm a big fan now of footnotes and exhibitions, providing resources and those sources. Like, this is where we got our information. Having that transparency, being much more forthright about it. That engenders trust and puts down that defensive response. Mainstream inclusive content. Make it that mainstream. That helps with the empathy part comes into this. The more we mainstream it, the more people accept it. So we're going to mainstream that inclusive content. We need to do this work. It's morally right, and we'll never apologize for being inclusive. But that still means pacing our work at the speed of trust. That speed of trust is so super important to have that buy-in and have people be open to what you're trying to share. Don't preach and don't make them feel dumb. But we get comments about being preached to a lot from more resistant traditional audiences. Don't want to do that. Be a forum for civil discourse and have those conversations. People aren't asking for it, but when it's done well, it's very effective. And then finally, accept that your visitors are human, and we are all human too. There's going to be bias. There's going to be controversy. There can be so much controversy. And then we're not going to be 100% successful. So this is very quick 2.0 version. 3.0 should be coming out this winter.
Susie, thank you so
Very good.
much. This is
Thank you very much.
really eye-opening. Thank you. Thank you for sharing, and looking forward to also reading the 3.0 version when it comes out. And we will now go into our last speaker of the day and for the summit. And then we will have Q&A session for both of you, which will lead into open discussion to wrap up the summit. So with that, I would like to invite Michelle Miller Hauk or Hook. Michelle, please correct me when I pronounce your last name. She is the Chief Wonder Maker of Carolina Raptor Center, and she will share with us her experience from the last summit and also her commitments and how to keep those empathy commitments in a COVID world. Thank you so much. And please pronounce your last name again so that everybody gets
Sure,
it right.
it's Hauk.
Okay.
We like to say house with a K.
Okay.
So let's see, I'm making sure that let's see. Here we go. Is that working for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. So good afternoon. I'm thrilled to be here today and want to let you know about our process and how we kept our empathy commitments and in the COVID world. I am, in fact, the Chief Wonder Maker, which is a story for another time. But first, I want to thank Elif for asking me to talk about these commitments. It certainly was transformational for our organization. And however, in contrast to what you've heard today from more academic presenters, what you'll hear from me is more about process, overcoming challenges, and how we were able to take our intention to keep commitments and push them through during the uncertainty of COVID and still find a modicum of success. Before I talk about the commitments, I think it's really important for me to explain to you where our organization was in talking about empathy when I joined the summit in DC last year. So CRC began at the University of North Carolina almost 50 years ago in the basement of the biology building and had its roots in wildlife rehabilitation. The organization was given its eviction notice from the basement when an eager administrator happened upon a vulture riding the elevator. His name was Campbell. I mean the vulture, not the administrator. So fast forward 35 years and I'm sitting in front of a crowd of people in Montreal at the Association of Science and Technology Centers with a few of my colleagues talking about how to measure wonder, what we called then the Wonder Project. We'd ask people to play a game that tried to answer some questions about their Raptor Center experience. And they were, what did you see that you would remember? What did that make you think about? How did that make you feel? And most importantly, what were you going to do about it? Some of the conversation today has really been about what people are going to do about what they see when they come to our museums. So what we discovered would start a transformation of our mission, vision, and approach at the Raptor Center. And so it just so happens that that day Elif was in the audience. The story really picks up from there with a book chapter in Elif's first volume, a series of speaking engagements at regional museum conferences, and ultimately my attendance at the 2019 Designing for Empathy Summit. In the meantime, at the Raptor Center, we were deep into building this new facility that you see in front of you that I'm sitting in today, Quest, and expanding our mission of birds inspire and envisioning what we could do better to serve our community. So when I walked into the doors of the GW Textile Museum that first day, I was primed for what would happen over the next few days. I met Kate, John, and Wei Ying and was inspired what I saw. I was ready to do something significant, ready to make a difference in my organization and in Charlotte in the work of empathy building. As a result, I made the following commitments. A personal commitment to convene 7 Charlotte environmental organizations to create a sister event of the Smithsonian's Earth Optimism. This commitment was inspired by Kate Christian from the Smithsonian's Conservation Commons, who you've just heard from, and some conversations that we've been having back at home with 6 other environmental organizations. And then I also made an organizational commitment to values-based intentional seasonal planning, which was inspired by John Carfagno from the History Museum of Art and informed by the core values work that we just completed back home. So let's start with Earth optimism and what happened. So it's probably important that we understand a little bit about what Earth optimism was. This concept appealed to me because of the positivity of focusing on solutions, not doomsday data, success instead of failure. After a 20-year career in advertising, I was working through the idea of moving people from apathy to action, and the concept of highlighting local replicable solutions to climate change really resonated with me. So when I returned to Charlotte, I started almost immediately recruiting partners and spreading the word. The organizations convened at a central location to make a plan. Out of that initial meeting came a plan for logistics, funders, invitees, speakers that was pretty solid. We met a few more times and nailed down what we thought was a bulletproof plan for an event scheduled for Earth Day 2020. Seemed like we were on track for success. Yada, yada, yada. A couple of weeks later, COVID happened, March 22nd. For the first couple of weeks, I have to be honest, we flailed a little bit. My colleagues and I sat home and perfected our online personas, curating our backgrounds. We were working from home for an organization that was decidedly in person and hands-on. We were a little lost. Then we realized that things were not going to change quickly, that our perfect Earth Day event may not even happen. UNCC sent kids home and canceled all the events that they had scheduled for the spring semester. So we were at a decision point. Many events scheduled during this time of uncertainty were canceled. We could have taken the easy way out, but we decided to press on and create a virtual event. We had no experience. We had no resources in this area, but it was an opportunity to start a wave of optimism for our city and for our organizations and for our community. So we pressed on. Less than 30 days later, we presented a 45-minute virtual program in support of Earth optimism. 8 presenters made 5-minute pitches for their solutions to mitigate climate change. Shade-grown coffee, the litter getter for streams, tips for having climate conversations. Viewers were encouraged to ride the bus, put that baby bird back up in the nest, create a backyard wildlife habitat, and plant a tree. We even announced a high school scholarship competition to come up with innovative solutions to climate change for Charlotte. Anyway, a little bit of Earth empathy produced a lot of Earth optimism. I wish I could tell you that we created a movement in Charlotte, but we're still working on that. And we want to make it happen in 2021 and beyond. So moving quickly to this the second commitment that we made, we took a journey to Hickory, which is about 50 miles away from us, to learn about values-based seasonal planning. After returning from DC, I emailed John and I asked him if he'd be willing to share his process with our leadership team. And we got a February date on the calendar to visit him in Hickory. Our team was particularly busy in February, so I really didn't brief them, tell them what we were doing that day. Spent about 15 minutes in the car on the way, filling them in. It's really a testament to the trust and openness of our team that they just came along with us. John and his team were so open and generous, and we are so thankful to them for sharing this process with us. It gave us the tools that we needed to start talking about how we would implement this in our organization. So by the time March rolled around, we were ready. We'd created a space that put our core values of integrity, collaboration, and innovation front and center. We'd prepped our people, made promises to each other for openness, and we created a safe space for collaboration and sharing of ideas. Again, 2 meetings in, COVID hit. As I was looking over my calendar preparing this talk, I came across meetings named things like learn how to do Microsoft Teams, practice staff meeting, and Zoom intro meeting. What is this? As I was saying to Elif last week, we've learned a lifetime worth of technology in the past 6 months. One of the keys to collaboration for us was the in-person nature of the seasonal planning process. So what were we going to do then? Again, after a few months, we realized that that we could use what we'd learned, what we planned, what we'd worked on to plan our response to COVID. As an outdoor entity, we had an advantage over other institutions with our ability to open during phase 2 of our governor's plan. So after creating a collaborative, multidisciplinary plan using the seasonal planning process, we opened to our members on June the 10th and subsequently to our visitors on July the 1st. The result and the response has been overwhelming because our community was longing for a place to go outside their homes and into nature. They have large part responded by wearing masks, vulture distancing 6 feet away, and buying tickets. On July 22nd, we did kind of the next step that I really believe is a result of our taking those collaborative and planning muscles, and we launched an interdisciplinary innovation team. We're calling it Raptor Force, to create new programming and to lean into empathy as an organization. We'll be flexing our seasonal planning and collaboration muscles with meetings every 6 months that include our board program committee to get their support through ideas and resources to bolster the innovation and human-centric design process. So our takeaways from the seasonal planning process, it really gave us the muscles that it took to plan for a successful COVID reopening, to create a new rapid response team, to make commitments to each other and the public about their safety. And our planning process will definitely evolve from here to meet the needs and the new normal we live in. But we stand on the shoulders of the Hickory Group Museum of Art and the concepts that they presented in 2019. So I'll leave you with these last thoughts about how to keep the commitments you're about to make. Narrow it down to what really matters. Recruit fellow travelers in your community and in your discipline, and inspire them. Make a plan, work the plan, be flexible and adapt to the current climate, and don't take no for an answer. So I will tell you that as we move forward, we're gonna get together as a group, and we're gonna make commitments that probably will have something to do with our diversity and inclusion and accessibility plans for the future. And we'll also be working with Heather Dinkins, who is on this call, who is doing a master's thesis project on how to convert environmental values into action, and what the engagement needs to look like. So those are our 2 things, and I thank you and look forward to talking to all of you in the future as we can inspire each other to keep the commitments that we're about to make together.
Michelle, thank you so much. And your position at the end of this program is a good one as you reflect on your commitment, but also taking action. And I think you can see in the chat box that you've inspired a lot of conversation at the tail end of our program. And so we'll circle back around to your comments in just a moment, but I do want to reflect on a couple of comments and questions for you, Susie. And one was, and I'm going to scroll through, but one comment was, do you see any of this attitude change as people change age, or do you notice anything in age differences? I know many years ago you worked with James Chung on Life Stages of the Museum Visitor, and so thinking about that, how people change in their museum going attitude and behavior. Any reflections on how that shows up in the data?
It's not straightforward, and there's a reason for that. So yes, overall, younger respondents are going to be more what we call neoteric than older respondents. And we see that in the broader population as well. Where it becomes really complicated for museums, though, is that our audience base is not consistent through their life stage. So what happens is that there's people who go to museums throughout their life. I call them our steady state museum goers. And there we see this progression. But we also have a huge number of more casual museum goers who, when they have children, dump into museums at a fast and furious rate. And then when their children age out, which for them is usually around the ages, it's going to break your heart, age 9. When their kids age out around the age 9, I know it's so sad, they leave. And then we're still left to those steady state museum goers. That, what I call parent bubble, tends to be more traditional than our steady state museum goers of the same life stage. So that skews the data somewhat, because people who go to museums tend to be more neoteric than people who are more casual visitors of museums.
Interesting. And since I've got you on the screen, I know you wanted to make a comment reflecting about identity, talking about identity.
Yeah, I'm actually going to share my screen again really briefly, because this is, you're going to now see, let's see. This is version 3.0 that you should be seeing. This is in draft form. There's a big typo on what I'm going to show you. I'm going to page, okay, yeah, here. So when we think about how people approach content, what we see with that traditional cluster, self-interest driven, that's where we see the lower levels of curiosity. It's about what they're already interested in. We're searching for certainty and just the facts. Identity and values validation. So that's why they go to, historic sites to validate white celebratory history, or they might go to art museums to look at great artwork that they find themselves in because they're white and they always find themselves in that great artwork, that kind of thing. Museums should be safe and comfortable. They don't want to be taken out of their comfort zone. And that's where we get that museum should be neutral. Don't tell me how to think mentality. For the neoterics, we get exactly pretty much the opposite. And this is where we have a big typo. It should say neoteric at the top. They're looking to broaden their worldview. So that's bringing in new things. That's that eudaimonic curiosity in action. They're much more comfortable with conflicting truths and ambiguity. They seek growth and expanded thinking. Much more comfortable. They actually want to be challenged. They're comfortable with discomfort. And it's by a pretty whopping factor of 2.5 times. And they, say museums should be taking that position, and that neutral reinforces white heteronormative perspectives. So we see these very different opinions coming out in these values, attitudes, and beliefs of these segments.
Interesting, thank you. And I'd like to perhaps reflect on a comment actually for both of you, well, anybody really, a point that Micah made, Micah from the Museum of Us in San Diego, who reminds us that museums are often cited as holding, quote, the public trust more than any other institution, and that we typically, those of us in the museum field, carry that banner pridefully. But maybe that public trust is illusory and based on false pretenses, built on colonial endeavor. That is the root of many of our institutions. And then Lottie from GW commented back, maybe we should just out ourselves. Maybe we should own up to it. And it occurs to me that we are at that inflection point in the museum field right now. So I wonder if either of you have any comments on what that would be like to out ourselves and what that would do to the public trust or the perception of our museum going audiences.
So Greg, this is Michelle. We are in the process of working with our board to really lean into an environmental justice conversation that we think is something that we feel called to do because of the public trust, but I am guessing that folks that have a lot of that have stock in what we would call systemic racism are going to be pretty upset with us about that. But we feel pretty strongly that that is something that we need to lean into.
So I'm the one who's been fielding all that trust research over the past 10 years. So yeah, what I see there is we have a lot of trust capital. So let's spend it down on something that really matters. And for those people who are anti-inclusive, there is nothing we're going to be able to say to convince them. So that's why I really think, if we focus on that status quo group that's not resisting but isn't seeking, and come at them in ways that aren't threatening and don't bring up those defenses, but instead just ways that crack open, we're going to have a lot more opportunity to use that trust to bring more people into that inclusive fold.
And Susie, thanks so much, because you just got to a comment from Louise, actually a question, knowing what the research is showing about adult learning, how or can we even invite people to relearn or undo what they think was the truth?
Yeah, there's a lot more willingness to relearn that among the esoteric audiences, because one of the things I look at and see a lot is, especially when it comes to the past and America's history, is how, as I call it, the historical empathy kind of cross. It's really mixed messaging. So we'll see people who are traditional say, I have more historical empathy because I don't judge people of the past by today's morals and values. But they themselves seem to feel judged by those events of the past and feel shame and guilt. Whereas people who are more neoteric will say, well, I have more historical empathy because I consider, basic human values. And there are people in the past who said this was wrong too. But in turn, they don't feel judged by the past. Instead, what they tend to feel is remorse, and which is a much more productive emotion. So we see this conflict. I've got visualized pretty neatly for our client project. So if anybody wants to see that, I can send it. But it's this conflicting, mixed up, messy feelings around empathy and who's being judged and why, that complicates it for everyone.
Well, in closing, I just want to say to you, Susie, that my graduate students at Seton Hall University are big fans of your work.
Thank you.
And your visualization. You make some really complicated information quite visual. So thank you for that. I know, thank you. And Michelle, you were talking about your 2019 commitments from the previous Empathy Summit, and this is a terrific segue into our closing conversation, in which we're going to ask folks, any of you folks at that summit, to share your reflections. And so, Elif, I wonder if you'd like to start this conversation off.
Yes, well, thank you so much for your presentation, Susie and Michelle. Much appreciated. And this is a good segue, and we have to sort of wrap it up one way or another. So there's no easy way of doing this, but here we go. So I would like to invite, anybody from 2019 Summit that we haven't heard from, would like to share their ideas and status of their commitments, perhaps. And also newcomers, the people who are just joining us for this year. What are some of their ideas? And the idea behind this event is basically, it was just a chance for us to all to catch up in this world right now that we are living in. And these are just seeds of thoughts, and each one of these presentations could have taken a whole day to be sort of explored further. But one of the other ideas is that we collaborate amongst each other. So I welcome any thoughts and any ideas, aspirations, if you'd like to share. And I'm going to change my view to now gallery view. So if you can just raise your hand just physically, or we can just go ahead and begin, because we only have 20 minutes. And I also hope that and assume that you have been filling the form. So that's a way that I will be able to go back and read all of your comments and ideas. But this gives us a chance to just talk, amongst ourselves, basically. How do you feel? Carly, is that? Oh, you were just. Did you want to go first?
Well, I can. I'll say that one of my commitments from 2019 was working with you and Tom and Andrea Jones on hosting and facilitating an empathy lab at AAM last year. But needless to say, COVID precluded us from doing that. And I don't think we had enough time or energy to figure out how to do that virtually. I'd like to think about whether it's virtual or at an AAM in person, committing to doing that, because I think, as you said, experiential interactive learning experiences are one of the best ways for people to build their empathy muscles. And then I also am very committed to publishing some of the research studies we've been doing at our museum, just to you know, broaden people's knowledge and understanding in the field.
Perfect. Thank you very much for sharing, Carly. Anybody would like to go next? Hi, Nancy.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. It was as great as last year and maybe better. So I think a lot of us had commitments last year, including me, that got interrupted by the COVID pandemic and the requirements of it. I ended up very, very quickly putting everything online, having literally artist talks around the world weekly on Sundays. And then we went into a film program on Saturdays from the museum and went into a Thursday program encompassing everything else from cooking to map making and on. So needless to say, my days were fairly busy and the schedule packed. So my commitment this year is going to be something that I'll probably argue with my director about, and it's to go slowly. That I think things could have gone a lot better if we'd stopped, like some other people have here, and thought about what we wanted to do instead of diving headfirst into it. So that's what I've learned this year, is that you don't have to react immediately to the situation at hand and do something. That sometimes it's good maybe to sit back and really assess the situation and think of all the possibilities. So my commitment is to go slower.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you for your insight.
Elif?
Yes, Emlyn.
I'd like to make sort of two observations in sort of a 3-year time frame since those of us who made the trip to India. It's sort of an understatement to say the world has changed radically since even 3 years ago, but it has. And if I can just quickly summarize my thought about this, it was in 2019, the year between that India trip and today, that the word existential became the word of the year by dictionary.com. And prior to this year, when somebody said or referred to an existential crisis, as the research shows, they were referring pretty much to an individual circumstance in which someone is having a problem in sort of coping with the world around their individual situation. Starting this year with the broad acceptance of climate change and its rippling implications, then the pandemic, and then racial injustice, and now maybe even government ineptitude, we have a sort of a cascading concurrence of existential crises in which the word now means not individual, but society-wide disruptions to a sense of well-being, or conversely, a sense of malaise in society. And so I want to say that in relation to this conversation about empathy and full support for everything that you've done to cause this to be another phase of dialogue, I want to say that I think over those 3 years, we've moved from the luxury of being able to focus on so-called wants into a necessity of so-called needs. And when more than 100 years ago, the visionary museologist John Cotton Dana said, learn what the community needs and fit the museum to those needs, he didn't talk about wants. Wants are nice if you can afford the luxury of responding, but we have now overriding needs that we can't ignore. And so I think one of the big challenges in front of the museum field including how it approaches empathy on a human to human, human to non-human, and human to environment scale, is that we've got to respond and recognize that it's no longer sort of a luxury of responding to wants. They may exist, but we have to mold an equation between wants and needs.
Thank you, Emlyn. Thank you very much. Yes.
Amir, I think you have your hand up as well.
Yeah.
Amir?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Well, again, this was really wonderful to be part of this for a second time, Elif. So thank you for everyone for wonderful contributions you have had. I wanted to just maybe talk about another AI in art, which was one of the commitments that I had to create one that's not necessarily geared towards empathy per se, but one that kind of takes on that path towards equity and justice as it pertains to the integration or also understanding and impacting the role of AI and in the larger AI ecosystem. So I'll share with you that website. It was a global summit that we created last year. Elif was part of it. There's some other members who were there as well. So that was one of the commitments that I had. So I think we did a good job. So if you're interested in, we're going to do a second year as well. That last year we did it was with Columbia University, with the new museum, and funded by the Knight Foundation. So if you're interested in hosting it or in working with us towards that future, decolonizing AI in relation to art making, please reach out to me. I would be happy to do that. And the second part, which is a very quick thing I wanted to make, is that given the pervasive nature of AI and how it's going to impact how we understand museums, how we understand displaying of art, how we understand consumption of art, how we understand making of art, and all of that, I personally have taken on the role of saying my process of creating would be one that will help create the technology. And I think that's my radical kind of intervention into that space where, as an artist, I'm creating the technology itself. So as part of that, we are creating a platform that democratizes access to AR, VR, XR content creation through AI. So if you're interested in knowing more about it, if you want to collaborate on that, if you want to put it, we are trying to opening it up. So if you want to be part of that platform, that's another invitation, and maybe my for next year.
Thank you, Amir. Would you mind please putting the website or information in the chat for us? Thank you.
Yes.
And I see Matt has his hand raised. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Elif. First, Elif, I want to thank you for the invitation to join, and I haven't had a chance to introduce myself in the last couple days during our lunch sessions, but I'm with Chautauqua Institution in Western New York, a pioneer in lifelong learning that has traditionally convened in a physical setting, very much designed for conversation, for gathering and fellowship. But it's also an organization that is at a critical time in thinking about how to get to our mission with, I think, with some significant kind of inward looking. I should take a step back. One of the reasons I'm excited to be part of this is because we at Chautauqua, which during our summer dedicate a week of interdisciplinary programming on issues, and really want to go deep into those issues through conversations with Elif and Susan Norton and others, are looking at a week on empathy. But I would say, just as if not more importantly, what I've so appreciated from hearing from artists and institutional leaders, and particularly museum leaders, is just how overwhelming it's been to understand the similar challenges we have. at Chautauqua through a lecture series and other kind of interdisciplinary programming with our interfaith work and through other kinds of educational programs going after issues, many of the same challenges. And so I'll just share what's exciting for me, not only to think about what we're able to achieve inside a week of programming, but how this kind of learning and empathy building can fundamentally change what we're able to achieve at Chautauqua and how Chautauqua engages a public that is gathering on the grounds, really trying to invest in how to expand who from that community is in dialogue. But I'll just share finally, because I don't want to take up too much of our time. I mean, Susie's research at the end and talking about those different audiences is the very thing that I've been struggling with our lecture series, where the tension for us is, what does it mean for people who are literally spending a week of their discretionary time in residence, and how do you go after those difficult conversations and being challenged, and what is the balance of that with a kind of release in whether it's recreational opportunities, especially with that more traditional audience. This has been incredibly eye-opening to me, and I just thank everyone here for providing the providing the environment for which me to learn. And I love the question I just saw from Louise, which is empathy a luxury? That one of the questions I remember hearing, may have been a couple of days ago, that I think was framed in that same kind of way, right? Which is empathy, something that is perhaps more easily embraced, or in some superficial ways by the privileged? What does, and what does that mean to be able to even create the kind of space for that? I'm grateful to all of you and Alif for the invitation. So thank you.
Matt, thank you so much for sharing. This is what this meeting is all about. So thank you so much for sharing. And going back to Louise's comment, empathy is empathy a luxury? I've always believed that empathy is a human right, because it really unlocks within ourselves our human capacity, how to become fully human. So I think it is definitely not a luxury, but it may be perceived as luxury these days, because I think certain groups have the luxury to talk about it, right? I mean, we have the time, we have the space, the internet access to be here in the safety of our homes, and whereas other people might be traveling on the Mediterranean in a flimsy boat, so that's the reality we are facing. But those of us who have access to any type of power and agency within ourselves as individuals, let's get it to use. Just like what Susie said, we have this, the museums have this trust capital. Let's spend it on something that matters. If we are not going to spend it now, there's no other time. So time is now. So anyway, I would like to hear from others. I don't see any other hands, but.
Alif, I wonder if it might be interesting to hear from some of our newbies, folks for whom the summit is the first time.
That's right, and I've just seen Jake's hand. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, well, good afternoon, maybe still morning, everybody. First of all, I wanted to thank Alif for the invitation to come to this summit. This is our first year here, my first year here, and it's just been such an incredible experience learning from all of you over the past 3 days. But just a quick chance to introduce myself. My name is Jake Newsom, and I work at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum here in Washington, D.C. And I met Alif this past summer because my team at the museum, we are seeking to form a new program for college and university students in which we hope to not only teach students, of course, about the history of the Holocaust, but we want to inspire and empower them to create communities in which hate can't flourish. And so clearly, this question of empathy, I think, is central to that goal. And so, I guess maybe my commitment from this summit is just being able to go through the really great resources that have been shared by all of you, and go through all my pages of notes to really think about how to be intentional about exploring empathy and integrating with intention these types of approaches into this program that we're kind of building from the ground up. So again, just wanted to say thanks not only to you, Alif, for the invitation, but also to everyone who's shared their knowledge and their experiences with us over the past 3 days.
Thank you, Jake. Thank you for sharing. I think we make the space what it is. So I'm just grateful to each one of you who are here. Thank you. Hi, Jeff.
Yeah, I just posted something in the chat about the project I'm working on with ethnic history from the California Gold Rush, and the possibility of using empathy to understand that from so many different perspectives. If any of you are interested, I would welcome you getting in touch. I'd love to learn from each and every one of you, because this is a challenging task we're trying to take on. And I feel like I have discovered this community that is going to be part of my life from now on. So very, very grateful. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing, Jeff. Thank you. One of the things that I would like to do personally is, to turn this knowledge and know-how that we have here, in this space and in the presentations that we have seen, from a children's museum to, an aquarium or a zoo, these are, or Holocaust museum, like these are evidence-based approaches to learning about ourselves, right? And I think world needs this knowledge so much, and they need access to fun, not fun, but yes, fun and engaging, inviting experiences to so that they're appealing to people to come and explore what makes us human. Of course, when we pose it as like what makes us human, it might be just like, like I don't know if I want to spend my day in that gallery, but we have to really like spread it out. It has to be, I think, a theme, so that we create the norm just by being there, out there, and talking about these things. The more people talk about these issues, I think it becomes norm and an expectation. So empathy is not a luxury; it has to be an expectation. And this is an energy, an emotion, or a tool that our world direly needs, and you can call it whatever you wish to call. I've learned my lesson in India. The last day of our summit, there was much tension about like how we gonna forward this, what happened here, and I had this experience actually. I was supposed to lead the last day at that summit, and we were invited to this into this beautiful Buddhist temple, and to have our final session, strategy session there. I didn't know what I was getting into. I thought it was just another space. But as the minute that we sort of took our shoes off, because we were walking in a temple where there was a U-shaped table with a slide projector and everything, our hosts were so kind and generous that they made us very, very comfortable. They opened up their, most treasured spaces for us. So I'm so grateful to them. But the minute I walked into that space, there was this, I don't know, maybe 30-foot Buddha, golden Buddha statue that was just dominating the space, in this very colorful space. And at that moment, I thought, I can feel the truth in this space, and this space is not a space to strategize. You don't plan in this space, you just have to be, and you just have to find yourself and reflect. And that was the end of the summit for me. Basically, I couldn't talk afterwards. And I said, to the group, I'm sorry, I won't be able to lead the session. So our colleagues and our friends in the group, Andrea and Susie and everybody basically just like spread around, and they created committees and everything, being the professional people that they are, they immediately let the meeting moving forward. But I mean, strategy is good, planning is good, but Dalai Lama, even he said that what I'm doing here is not something that I'm not with the expectation that I will see immediate results. We are basically planting the seeds for something that might come after we are gone from this earth, but knowing with that knowledge, I think the test that I'm personally feeling that I have to, with knowing what I know about the world and what I can do, what I must do, I cannot not act. And the time is now to just make a choice and take action in whatever direction, in whatever capacity each one of us may hold. It could be smiling more to people around us. It could be paying attention to flowers and bees. It could be being more kind to animals and trying to keep an open mind and heart individually. It all begins within, and then hopefully as we understand more about ourselves and our own humanness and what we can be as human beings, in contrary to what we are seeing in the world today, then it gives me hope that eventually we'll get there. These are growing pains. I think the humanity is going through these tests, and I also believe that we are almost like toddlers in our understanding of our own humanness, right? We are receiving these tests from the universe, just like take COVID, take climate change, but a toddler reacts differently to these tests, right? But as we grow in our humanness and become more adult humans, then we will hopefully have the capacity to deal with them and learn from them, to become the better creatures that I think we are designed to be.
Elif, just fitting that philosophical statement, I was introduced yesterday to an article called "The Pandemic is a Portal," written by Arundhati Roy from India, that was published in the April 5th, 2020 issue of the Financial Times. And if I just may share this last paragraph, or 1.5 paragraphs, it says, whatever it is, the coronavirus has made the mighty kneel and brought the world to a halt like nothing else could. Our minds are still racing back and forth, longing for a return to quote unquote normality, trying to stitch our future to our past and refusing to acknowledge the rupture. But the rupture exists. And in the midst of this terrible disaster, it offers us the chance to rethink the doomsday machine we have built for ourselves. Nothing could be worse than a return to normality. Historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred and our avarice, our data banks and our dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us, or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it.
Thank you, Emlyn. Thank you. Exactly my sentiments. And thank you for sharing. And I know that I'm gonna miss you so much. I've gotten used to you. You've become a part of my family here around my kitchen table, literally. So my background looks very tidy and sort of like clean. You should see the other side. So thank you so much for being here and being such the great hearts and minds you are. So grateful. Please keep in touch. We should keep talking, keep in touch with each other, with me, and let's use the platforms that we currently have available to ourselves to move this conversation by inviting each other over to ideation, experimentation, whatever you call it, and we are just starting. So as I said in the beginning, I would like to conclude with the same sentiments. Aşk olsun, may it be love. Thank you all.